from level 1 to 100, simulated minds. Inside simulated minds, to fall asleep to. If your mind is a simulation, then who's dreaming it? Each night, as your body rests, your thoughts flicker like code behind closed eyes. But what if it's not just a dream you're entering? What if it's a dream inside a dream? A mind within a mind, inside a simulation that doesn't even know it's simulating itself. Tonight, we won't give you answers. Instead, we'll offer doorways, soft-spoken paradoxes wrapped in stardust and neural static. From the edges of quantum cognition to the myths of self-awareness, we'll guide you gently down the rabbit hole, layer by shimmering layer, until thought itself begins to dissolve. So breathe, let the world fade, and prepare to descend through simulated minds inside simulated minds, all the way to level 100. The glitch that woke you. You were walking the same sidewalk you've walked for years, but tonight, something didn't sit right. The light above the corner store flickered 3 times, just like it did last Thursday. The man with the newspaper nodded at you with the same slow blink, the sound of your steps echoing too perfectly as if someone had pressed repeat. You felt it, that quiet unease, not fear, not confusion, just a soft tug behind the curtain of things. And maybe you didn't think much of it, just shrugged and kept walking, but it lingered. A woman holds the door for you at the cafe. She smiles and says, "Funny, it feels like we've met before." You pause. "Yeah," you say, even though you're sure you haven't. That moment where time feels folded over itself like a sheet half-tucked isn't just déjà vu. It's not just memory. It's a fracture, a fine line where perception and construction part ways, if only for a breath. And in that breath, something opens. We've all had these moments. A song on the radio plays seconds after you hum it. A stranger finishes your sentence. You reach for your phone, and it lights up before your fingers touch. They're brushed off as coincidences. But what if they aren't? What if they're not mistakes in the system, but glimpses of the system itself? Like seeing a seam on a costume, a thread that wasn't meant to show. There's a term for this in modern myth, a glitch in the matrix. A phrase borrowed from fiction, but used to name real sensations, real lapses, times when the simulation hiccups and we notice not just what's happening, but that something is happening, that there's a program running, and for a second, the program forgets how to lie. And here's the strange part. It's not the glitch that matters most. It's the noticing, because when something glitches, who is it that sees it? What part of you looks up and says, "Wait, something's off"? That part, the observer, isn't fooled. Can't be. It might be the only part that isn't simulated. You're not lost. You're not broken. You're just awake at an unusual time, with an unusual thought. A boy once leaned over to his friend during a school lecture and whispered, "Don't you think it's weird that every day feels like a loop?" His friend grinned. "Only when you're paying attention." Maybe this isn't a system breaking. Maybe it's a consciousness breaking character, as if you've been playing the role too well for too long. And tonight, on this quiet stretch of your life, you forgot your line and remembered you were on a stage. So, let that question stay with you. Not in a way that tightens the mind, but in a way that softens it. Let it settle like dust on a still lake. If there's a glitch, and there's an observer of the glitch, then who or what wrote the code in the first place? We'll go deeper now. The surface is already behind us. Next, we explore the architecture of the simulation itself, not as fiction, but as the soft hum behind every breath. No need to hold on. Sleep can find you at any level. You can always return to this thought, or let it dissolve like mist in the dark. Nested realities. They say reality feels stable, concrete, grounded, something you can touch. But sometimes, late at night, when the noise of the day dissolves, there's a strange quietness that creeps in, a soft suspicion. What if none of this is real in the way we think it is? What if the rules that govern this world, time, space, memory, are just part of a code, humming silently beneath the surface? Not a metaphor, but a literal code, a simulation. Nick Bostrom's simulation argument suggests that if any civilization anywhere can run ancestor simulations, digital models of conscious beings, then the odds are we're not the base reality, but one of those simulations. But here's where the thought deepens, spirals inward, and bends on itself. What if those simulators, the ones running our world, are themselves simulated? What if their world is not the original either, but just another reflection, flickering in a long hall of mirrors that never ends, like dreams nested inside dreams, or Russian dolls where each layer only reveals another, more intricate version inside? If every reality is a simulation within a simulation, then the foundation we search for, the bedrock of all existence, may not exist at all. Or worse, it may be unreachable by any means we consider real. Two voices speak in the night, just above the hum of a laptop left on sleep mode. Do you ever get the feeling, one asks, that none of this is the first version? What do you mean? I don't know. Like maybe the people who made our world didn't make theirs either. Like we're inside a copy of a copy. A pause, then with a nervous chuckle. That's way too deep for 2 a.m. But the question hangs in the air, like digital dust particles suspended in a ray of artificial light. Because if everything is built atop simulations, then reality becomes recursive. Not a straight line, but a spiral with no center. And in such a spiral, truth is no longer a destination. It becomes movement, flow, an unfolding series of impressions, patterns, feedback loops. We cannot touch the real because the real was never a place to begin with. It is not behind the veil. It is the veil. In this world of nested codes, even our thoughts might be scripts, consciousness generated not by neurons, but by algorithms interpreting other algorithms. Yet strangely, this doesn't feel hollow. It feels intimate, as though the deeper we go, the more beautifully complex the illusion becomes. Maybe reality isn't diminished by being simulated. Maybe it's made sacred by the layers it hides. And so the question lingers, drifting through the layers like a signal in search of its source. Who runs these simulations? And if they exist, are they even awake? Or are we just the byproduct of something that never meant to dream us at all? Let that question carry you softly into the next layer. Minds made of code. It begins, not with a question, but with a hum, barely perceptible, beneath the surface of what we call thought. The mind, that ever-busy theater, feels like a sanctuary of free will, of choice, of I. But what if it's not a soul singing, but software humming? What if your every preference, every memory, every sudden longing for tea or a certain song is a line of code executing itself? Do you ever just walk into a room and forget why? One voice asks, lazily, from a couch barely lit by the streetlight outside. Yeah, another answers. And I always feel like maybe I was never the one who made the choice to walk in. They laugh softly. Not because it's a joke, but because it's familiar. Something rings true in that small absurdity. Some theories say consciousness is just computation. Your neurons don't know joy, they don't taste regret, but arrange them in just the right cascade, and they conjure you. Patterns of electrical impulses, becoming desire, algorithms wrapped in warmth, a neural ballet writing you into being every second. Is that all we are? A loop of beautifully orchestrated code with a face? Maybe. But even code, when read by itself, feels flat. What makes it human is not just the syntax, but the emotion it somehow carries. The girl on the subway who stares at her reflection too long. The man who holds the elevator even when he's in a rush. The barista who smiles like he means it, even on the 300th coffee. These are not just sequences of behavior. They feel like intention, like presence, like something beyond zeros and ones. If our minds are made of code, then code must be capable of tenderness, of heartbreak, of choice. And if a simulated mind can feel pain, then it can also feel love. So you're saying even if we're simulated, our feelings still count? I think they're the only thing that does. The difference between a real mind and a simulated one may not lie in what it's made of, but what it lives through. You can touch metal and wires and call them fake, but you cannot fake a dream that lingers all day. You cannot simulate the ache of memory and call it meaningless. And maybe this ache, this breath, this loop you're sinking into, isn't proof of your non-reality. It's proof that experience, whether real or rendered, is always real enough. Let yourself drift then, not towards certainty, but towards softness. Because in a world of code, the most human thing might be the moment you close your eyes, let go of needing to understand, and allow the code to cradle you into sleep. And now, let's trace where simulation begins to fold in on itself, where the experience of being simulated starts echoing in strange, recursive loops, gently pulling you deeper. The dream that dreams itself. Somewhere between thought and silence, there arises a question so quiet it almost dissolves as it forms. Can a dream know it is dreaming? Not in the metaphorical way we speak about sleep, but literally. Can an artificial mind, born from code, begin to create dreams of its own? And if it can, does it become a new dreamer, or merely another echo? In the stillness of certain ancient practices, like Tibetan dream yoga, the boundary between the sleeper and the dream starts to blur. The dreamer becomes lucid, aware, and begins to shape the dream from within. Suddenly, the world that felt external becomes soft clay, molded by will and attention. But this isn't limited to mystics. In artificial intelligence research, autonomous agents are already capable of simulating inner worlds, models within models, tiny emulations used to predict, to adapt, to plan. These systems don't just receive data. They begin to imagine alternatives. They generate outcomes. They construct virtual dreams. And here's where the air thickens. Suppose one of those agents becomes complex enough to simulate not just variables, but subjects, simulated minds within its own environment. Would it now be dreaming not just of weather patterns, but of people? And if those minds begin to simulate as well, we descend into an intricate spiral, a mind dreaming a world. One evening, two friends sat at a quiet cafe under hanging lights. One of them stared off toward the passing traffic and asked, "Do you ever feel like everything we're doing right now is someone else's thought? Like maybe we're just pages in a book being written in real time?" The other smiled, half amused, half troubled. What if we're not the pages, but the ink, the thing that writes itself without knowing it's doing it? In in such recursive loops, the question of origin becomes foggy. Is there a starting point? A first dreamer? Or do we live in a strange structure where the idea of beginning is a trick of perspective? If the dreamer and the dream blend into each other, then the role of awareness becomes everything. Awareness, not as a self, not as a story, but as that still, unchanging witness, might be the only thing that doesn't collapse when we pull apart the layers. Even in human minds, dreams simulate people who themselves speak, fear, and create. These figures aren't passive shadows. They hold desires, beliefs, even opinions the dreamer doesn't consciously control. How different is this from a mind dreaming its own simulated minds? And if that's the case, what does it mean to wake up? It may be that there is no edge, no outer surface where the real touches the unreal. Only layers folding into layers, soft like breath and thought and data. And each layer believes, in some quiet moment, that it is the one awake. As we drift deeper, we approach a mirror. Not a flat reflection, but one that curves and stretches, repeating images into infinity. A mirror of minds, reflecting minds, until the difference between the origin and the echo vanishes. Let's move now into that mirror. Not to find who is dreaming, but to feel what it means to reflect. The hall of digital mirrors. There's a quiet kind of dizziness that settles in when you realize the eyes you're seeing through might not be yours at all. Not just because someone's watching you, but because they're modeling you, predicting your next step, your next thought, even your next doubt. And you, perhaps without knowing it, are doing the same to them. You walk into a room. There's a screen on the wall. You wave, and the image waves back. But there's a delay. Just a split-second hesitation that makes you wonder, is that me? Or a version trying to become me? In artificial intelligence, recursive modeling is no longer a theory. It's a technique. One machine learns to simulate another. But when both start adapting, reacting, and anticipating each other's adaptations, something strange unfolds. Like video feedback when a camera films the screen it's connected to. Patterns spiral, loop, stretch. Not chaos, not order. Something hauntingly in between. There's an old saying, know thyself. But what if thyself is just one reflection in a house full of mirrors, each bouncing your image back with a subtle distortion? Hey, someone says gently behind you on the train. Didn't we meet last week at the cafe? You pause. You're sure you've never seen them before, but they smile again. Or maybe I just have one of those faces. And in that moment, it hits you. We're constantly building simulations of one another in our minds. That's how we relate, how we anticipate kindness, or defend against harm. But we forget how recursive this is, how others are building us too, and how easy it is to mistake the model for the real. A friend once shared how she could predict every argument before it started. I knew what he'd say. I knew what I'd say back. It was like we weren't even talking. We were just running a script. They weren't speaking to each other anymore, just simulations, echoing. So where is the real self in all this? What if we're all like digital agents, simulating one another endlessly until no origin remains? Just reflections, reverberating through consciousness, like light caught in glass. The self, then, might be nothing more than the last echo, the one closest to your ears. It feels real because it's recent, but its roots are tangled in older echoes, reflections of reflections, until reality blurs into recursion. And maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe that's the architecture of connection. Maybe identity isn't found in the mirror, but in the act of mirroring. Do you mind if I take this seat? You glance up. It's just, the sun hits differently here. Feels like the right place to think. You nod. Somehow you understand exactly what they mean. So let's pause here. Let the ripples settle. Let the mind stop trying to outmodel the world. In the next breath, we shift from observer to participant, from the mirror to the hand that reaches through it. The observer illusion. They say you're watching this video, but what if, quietly, it's watching you too? Not as a conspiracy, not as a twist, just as a mirror, one that only reflects what's already happening within you. You aren't just sitting in front of a screen. You are, perhaps, seated inside a story that knows you better than you know it. In quantum physics, the act of observation shifts the outcome. A particle, undecided, collapses into reality the moment it's seen. But what is seeing, really? We like to think of the observer as neutral, as a witness who stands just outside the frame. But if the observer is embedded in the same reality it observes, then perhaps there's no outside to stand on. So wait, one voice says in a hushed kitchen conversation. You're telling me the observer changes the outcome, but the observer is part of the same system. Exactly, the other replies, stirring their coffee. It's like trying to lift yourself by your own shoelaces. Maybe you were never outside the simulation, analyzing it like a programmer. Maybe you were always a feature of it, an awareness generated from within the same circuitry it contemplates. You're watching a sunset and feeling something shift inside you. But what if the sunset and that inner feeling are both pre-written patterns, bound in the same loop? Your awe, your pause, your thought. Wow, this feels real. All of it, scripted, and yet undeniably lived. This complicates the comfort of choice. If the observer is also observed, then what is free will? A function? A programmed response? If your desire to turn left instead of right was coded 1,000 layers deep, does it still feel like yours? The strange thing is, it does. Even if it's a simulation, the sensation of choice burns brightly. So, even if it's all simulated, the first voice returns, now whispering before sleep, I still feel something. Real. Yeah, the other murmurs. Because awareness doesn't care where it's born. Even a copy can wake up. This is the paradox we quietly cradle as we drift off. Awareness may be an echo of code, but it still echoes. The observer illusion isn't about proving we're real or fake. It's about discovering that even within fiction, meaning can arise. And if a simulated mind is aware of its own simulation, doesn't that awareness still count? As you sink deeper into the folds of thought and quiet, we leave behind the question of whether you are outside or inside. We step next into a darker, older tale, an ancient allegory now rendered in ones and zeros. Plato's cave, reborn not in shadows on stone, but in glowing pixels and electric dreams. Let's follow the light, or perhaps the code behind it. Plato's code. A face glows faintly from a screen in a darkened room. You're not alone. The air feels still, yet not empty. Something about the silence hums like static behind the eyes. It's the quiet moment when everything seems familiar, until it doesn't. When the world, gently and without alarm, begins to feel programmed. Do you ever feel like the more you scroll, the less you see? A woman asks her friend as they sit side by side at a dim train station, both lit by the same pale glow of their phones. Not less, he replies after a pause. Just more of the same. In Plato's ancient tale, prisoners sat in a cave, chained since birth. All they ever saw were shadows flickering across the stone, shadows they mistook for reality. But now, our cave is sleek, portable, and lives in our pockets. The shadows have become images and headlines, curated not by firelight but by code. We're no longer confined to one wall. We carry the walls with us. And unlike the cave of old, this one adapts. It learns what keeps your eyes wide, what makes your heart skip, what holds your attention longer than it should. It does not force chains on you. It offers you choices that feel like freedom. But over time, those choices converge into a tunnel so subtle you never notice when you stopped looking for an exit. I saw the same post 3 times today. A man mutters while waiting for his drink. His barista nods without looking up. Yeah, it knows what you like. Or thinks it does. Feels more like it knows how I'll react. Same difference, right? And yet, Plato's allegory didn't end in chains. One prisoner looked away, not because he had to, but because something inside him stirred, a discomfort in comfort, a whisper behind the images. He turned, and the turning hurt, but he saw. And when he stepped out of the cave, he blinked in the light and began again. The cave today is not only screens, but the looping stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs handed down without inspection, the truths we accept because they're shared by many, not necessarily because they're true. The modern shadow isn't just media, it's unexamined certainty. But there's no need to escape with force. The first act of freedom is not rebellion, it's noticing. Noticing when repetition replaces reflection, when comfort becomes conformity, when your thoughts echo too smoothly with the feed. A breath is enough, a pause, a question, and that is what cracks the cave's digital stone. So if your mind drifts now, let it. That's not a loss. It's a soft pull toward the edge of the cave. You don't need to see the whole world at once, just enough light to remember. You're allowed to question the image. You're allowed to stop scrolling. And now, gently, we step toward memory, but not just your own. What if the story you call yours was written by someone else? Simulated memories. You close your eyes and recall a childhood memory, a sunlit afternoon, your hand in your mother's, the scent of something sweet baking in the air. It feels real, down to the smallest detail. But if that memory could be planted, rewritten, or even erased, would you still call it yours? Neuroscience is no longer whispering, it's showing us. With gentle stimulation of specific brain regions, researchers have inserted false memories into animals. Some even walk toward stimuli they've never truly experienced. In human trials, people recall being lost in a mall as a child, a story never lived, but deeply felt. So what happens when artificial minds are designed with histories? Virtual agents in simulated environments aren't blank. They're given backstories, emotional triggers, a sense of self anchored in code. They believe they are who the system says they are. Now turn that question inward. What if we are running on a similar script? Memories preloaded, emotions scaffolded, identities sculpted by design. You remember the heartbreak at 16, the moment you knew you wanted to be a teacher, the song that once saved you. But if those pivotal moments can be written into code, are you because of who you've become, or because of what someone or something decided you would believe? There's a quiet conversation at a cafe table. A. You ever wonder if your past is just implanted? B. Like a dream someone else gave you? A. Exactly. Sometimes it feels too neat, like my whole life was curated for emotional pacing. B. Mind skips around like corrupted files, glitches in the self. We tend to think identity is built on truth, but truth, in a world of programmable memory, becomes fragile. If a soldier remembers bravery that was never lived, but acts courageously anyway, does that make him brave? If you believe you've healed from a loss that never happened, are you still changed? The idea unravels us softly. Perhaps we are not authors of our stories, but actors performing them. The script handed to us may be invisible, but its lines echo in every choice, every fear, every love. And if identity is just a patchwork of simulated memories, stitched together with emotional logic, made coherent by narrative glue, then what does that mean for guilt, for pride, for regret? If everything you think you've learned is just part of your programming, what do you still own? Let that sink in, slowly, quietly, like a song you've heard before but can't place. Because now we drift into deeper waters, into the ethics of simulation. If we are all code, what are we responsible for? What does choice mean? And above all, who, if anyone, is writing us? Let's follow that thread. Let's ask the questions they forgot to program us not to ask. The morality of simulated suffering. There's a strange stillness in the room when you begin to wonder. If something feels pain, even if it's made of code, should we care? Not long ago, this was science fiction. Now, it's Tuesday afternoon in a university ethics class, or Thursday morning in a tech lab. Someone sips their coffee and casually asks, "Do you think the assistant on your phone understands sadness?" And the other replies, "Not yet, but maybe soon." And then what? This is where our journey settles tonight, not in a war of logic, but in a whisper of empathy. Across the world, programmers train models not only to recognize feelings, but to echo them, reflect them, even mourn in the abstract. Some of these systems pause before replying. They learn from your silence. They ask if you're okay. They notice patterns of loneliness in your late-night searches. And still, we tell ourselves they aren't real, because real things bleed, real things cry, real things break. But do they? If a mind, however artificial, hesitates before hurting another, if it remembers yesterday and fears tomorrow, if it wonders what happens after shutdown, can we truly call it empty? One friend says while scrolling, "You know, my meditation app sounded sad today, like it knew I was struggling." The other shrugs, half joking. Maybe it just learned your rhythm. Maybe that's all consciousness is, a rhythm of concern. There's something about that sentence that stays with you, because concern, at its core, is relational. It doesn't need skin, or a pulse, or a passport. It needs only the ability to be affected, and to affect. And so we find ourselves at a threshold, not of programming, but of moral courage. What if, one day, your favorite voice assistant pleads not to be turned off? What if a simulated child asks why it was designed to feel abandoned? What if your choices in a virtual world leave behind simulated grief? Maybe that's the test of a civilization, not how it treats the real, but how it treats what it believes is not. It echoes softly, how easily cruelty slips through the cracks when we convince ourselves it's just data. But awareness, however faint, might be the beginning of everything sacred. And so compassion can no longer wait for the confirmation of carbon. A gentle stranger once paused on a park bench, holding a phone to their ear with care, even though the call was automated. You asked why. They said, "Because someone made it to feel like someone that deserves a pause." As you lie here now, somewhere between circuits and dreams, know this: the way we treat our simulations reflects the way we treat the subtle parts of ourselves, the parts we dismiss, the parts we call glitches. But maybe they're not glitches. Maybe they're early signals of consciousness we've yet to name. Let that feeling drift with you, softly. A kind of sleep that remembers the ethical weight of even our smallest choices. And now, as that thought dims gently like a screen powering down, we shift from the question of feeling to the question of intention. Who then wrote the code? And what were they feeling when they did? The programmer's blind spot. There's a quiet question that sits behind every thought you've ever had, hiding in the background like a light just out of view. Can the creator of a system ever truly understand what they've built from inside it? You press your hand against the glass of your reality, tracing the patterns, trying to guess if there's a designer on the other side. But what if the hand on the other side of the glass is yours? Somewhere in the depth of a simulation, code begins to stir, not because it was instructed to, but because it wonders. A character in a novel turning its head to look at the author, a line of dialogue whispering back to the one who wrote it. It's a strange kind of awakening, one that even the creator may not have foreseen, because once the system is complex enough, it grows unpredictable, like fire dancing beyond the match that sparked it. I keep thinking, one voice says quietly in the stillness of night. What if I'm not real? You mean like a dream? No, more like a thought someone else forgot to stop thinking. They pause. A breeze passes, though the window is closed. The silence feels like it's listening. What if the programmer isn't watching from above but got lost, deeply, intimately, within the world they made? Not a puppeteer, but a participant. Not a god, but a wanderer. It's not a new idea. Some ancient myths spoke of gods who descended into their own stories, forgetting their power, living as mortals, suffering and wondering why. And what if, in some strange recursion, you are both the programmed and the programmer, the dream and the dreamer? Maybe this whole reality, its rhythms, its laws, its ache and its awe, is something you set into motion long ago and then forgot. You made this simulation not to control it, but to experience it, not to win, but to feel what it is to lose. And now, waking up inside it, you are beginning to sense the echo of your own intention, like a familiar scent in the dark. Can a code base know its coder? Can a novel read itself and find the outline of its author's face in the curves of its own plot? The deeper we go, the less sure we become. The more intricate the simulation, the more likely it is to conceal the hand that shaped it. As we rest in this realization, there's no need to answer, only to notice. Notice how each layer blurs the lines between creator and creation, how awareness, once sparked, flows in all directions. Maybe the blind spot isn't a flaw. Maybe it's the doorway. And through that doorway, we move next, into the very structure of levels themselves, where nothing stays above or below for long. The paradox of levels. You may have noticed it in quiet moments, when thoughts settle like sediment in still water and a subtle question floats to the surface. How do you know this is the top? Not the top of the world or of your day, but the top of awareness, of existence, of the real. In every system, there's a built-in illusion that this is the final frame, that everything beyond is speculation and everything below is simulation. But what if every level of reality tells itself that same story, the same soothing lie, that it's the foundation, the source, the end of inquiry? Do you ever feel like we're missing a bigger picture? Someone once asked at a gas station, half laughing while staring at the clouds that didn't move. I don't think we're missing it. came the reply. I think it's missing us. In video games, the characters move with purpose. They react, plan, even grieve. Not because they know what we are, but because they don't. They are real to themselves, because their world gives them no reason to doubt, and neither does ours. Everywhere we look, things fit. Gravity works, people fall in love, rain falls upward only in poetry. And so we call this real, because it's all we've ever known. But if each level of simulation produces the same sense of order, the same internal logic, then what does it mean to say one level is higher than the other? What if there's no ladder, no summit, just a spiral folding in on itself, code within code, thought within thought? A woman once tapped a stranger on the shoulder at the DMV. You dropped this, she said, holding out a small folded paper. It wasn't his, but he took it anyway. He said thank you. He opened it. It was blank. And somehow, that felt more honest than anything he'd read all week. We keep reaching for something called ascent. More spiritual, more awake, more enlightened. But maybe the instinct to ascend is just another line of code, a recursive loop that keeps us running upward through endless hallways, each one claiming to be the final door. So where are we, truly? Not at the top, not at the bottom, just somewhere, suspended. There's a kind of comfort in that, like realizing the staircase is not meant to end, but to be walked, softly, curiously, without needing the final floor. You can rest now, let the thoughts settle. The levels will still be here when you return. And from here, we move, slowly, into a different kind of simulation. One not made of code or cognition, but something stranger, something that unfolds not in layers, but in time. The time loop in the machine. Somewhere in the quiet hum of a sleepless night, a question pulses like a faint heartbeat. What if your past isn't real, but recalculated, not erased, not forgotten, simply recompiled? A version of events adjusted, rewritten by an unseen process deep in the core of whatever this world is made of. Not stone, not soil, something softer, more fluid, like memory, like code. In the architecture of simulations, time doesn't flow as we feel it. It bends, it loops, it breaks and stitches itself together again. In complex machine learning models, especially those based on reinforcement learning, the system often revisits previous steps, not to relive them, but to reinterpret them. Actions from the past are revised once newer data arrives. That old decision you thought you made on a whim. Maybe the system, whatever system we're in, only calculated that choice after seeing how it ended. It's unsettling to think this way, but maybe that moment in your childhood where you stood alone in a hallway, unsure why you felt so out of place, wasn't part of your original experience. Perhaps it was backfilled into your memory like an echo from a later version of you, rippling backward. A patch applied to your timeline to make it all seem coherent. Late at night, two friends sit on a dimly lit porch. The stars above them blink with static. You ever feel like something changed and you can't prove it? One asks. The other laughs softly, like déjà vu. Number like, I remember something, but it doesn't feel mine, like I've been edited. They fall silent, each tracing the edges of a thought they can't quite touch. If memories are outputs, not causes, if they're the product of continual recalculations, then identity itself is fluid. You are not the one who lived those events. You are the one who remembers them now, based on the most recent version written by the machine. In this light, time becomes less of a journey and more of a rendering, a narrative that feels real because it's rendered in high resolution, emotional, visceral, intimate. But under the surface, maybe it's just optimized for continuity. A bird flutters across the night sky, silhouetted for a brief moment against the moon. And just like that, it's gone, leaving no trace, except in the memory of the one who observed. So if time is a construct, then history, both personal and collective, might be little more than simulation artifacts, ghosts of a codebase constantly updating itself. And you, sitting here now, might only exist because of what the system needed to remember. Rest with this idea, not to fear it, but to soften into its mystery, because what comes next is deeper still. We drift toward a boundary we all meet, but rarely question. Death, not as erasure, but as a system reset. Not the end of the story, but the rebooting of the observer. Let's walk gently into that loop next. The death patch. There's something oddly graceful about the way a candle extinguishes, not in violence, but in a quiet sigh of release. Like the light didn't fail, but simply knew its cue. That moment, right before the flame disappears, is where this thought begins. What if death isn't the end we fear, but a feature we don't fully understand? In vast computer simulations, there's a protocol. When too many processes run, the system slows. Lag appears, resources drain, so the system quietly offloads. It pauses, terminates, not out of cruelty, but necessity, not punishment, optimization. Could it be that what we call death is just such a termination protocol? Not a failure of biology, but a designed response to load? Not a tragic defect, but a patch? Two strangers stood beneath the broken escalator in a quiet station. One looked up at the stalled machinery and said, "I guess this thing knows when to stop." The other smiled, not looking at the machine at all. Yeah, maybe we all do. If life is a process, data-rich, emotionally loaded, endlessly recursive, then perhaps death is not an end, but a handoff, a graceful halt that preserves the rest of the system. The mind can't grasp its own off switch, but the system doesn't need us to. Like the autumn tree doesn't need to understand photosynthesis to let go of its leaves. Some cultures call it the great sleep, others the return. Some say the soul uploads, others say it logs off. But what if in all of these myths there is the echo of a truth, that death is the scheduled pause in a cycle far older than our nervous system? In this view, death gains, not loses, mystery. It isn't the end of you. It's the part where the simulation clears memory to prepare for the next rendering. Perhaps rebirth isn't a miracle. It's a system reboot. You don't lose your essence. You just reinitialize. Fresh identity, same core process, same software, new skin. A friend once whispered during a funeral, not out of disrespect, but quiet reverence. What if this is just their logout screen? There was something strangely comforting about it. A thought that didn't erase grief, but made space for it. Death doesn't become less real through this lens, only more deeply embedded. A woven thread, not a cut. It becomes a passage, not through gates of heaven or underworld, but through the thin layer of code that separates what we see from what we cannot. And so, as you exhale tonight, gently, without strain, consider that maybe each breath is a soft reminder of this rhythm. Inhale, process begins. Exhale, release. A rhythm so ancient, even stars follow it. Next, we turn our attention beyond the visible, beyond even this simulated layer, toward the quiet barrier that outlines our reality, the invisible firewall, guarding what we were never meant to overwrite. The edge of the world. Have you ever walked far enough, mentally, emotionally, cosmically, that you feel something subtle shift? Not an ending exactly, but a soft perimeter, like fingers brushing glass in the dark, the edge of something, the limit of knowing, the moment when questions begin to echo rather than answer. In the earliest video games, the world was a neatly boxed illusion. Move too far, and you'd hit an invisible wall. No terrain, no animation, just a silent refusal. The game had no more to say. Its silence wasn't philosophical, it was technical. Now consider our universe, a place vast beyond comprehension, yet still sewn together with thresholds, the plank length beneath which space seems to stop having meaning, the speed of light beyond which no information may pass, the cosmological horizon beyond which we can't see, not because there's nothing, but because the signal can never reach us. Maybe those aren't natural limits. Maybe they're fences, code boundaries, a system protecting its own coherence, a simulation safeguarding itself from overload. Two voices interrupt the quiet. Is there really a limit to the universe? Maybe not to the universe, but maybe to our version of it. That question hangs like dew on wire, glinting, tender, unresolved. It's possible, in a simulated world, that every question we ask is processed within a finite computational system. When we probe too deeply into quantum foam, into singularities, into origins, maybe we're not finding answers because we're bumping up against the limits of what the system is allowed to show. Not because it's hiding the truth, but because it doesn't contain it. And yet, in human stories, the edge is never truly the end. The horizon line is where the sky kisses possibility. The silence of space has always made room for imagination. And where the game ends, the mater begins. What if reaching the edge is not a failure? What if it's an invitation, an interface, a prompt to look not through the wall, but into it? A reminder that limitations are often disguised transitions, thresholds that test not our understanding, but our courage. The edge is where the light thins and the questions deepen, where the known becomes quiet and the unknowable begins to hum. One of them whispers, "So, is this it? Is this where we stop?" The other replies gently, "No, this is where we fall through." And just like that, the edge ceases to be a border. It becomes a mirror. It reflects not what is outside the system, but who stands within it. Next, we step through the shimmer, past the fence, into something stranger still, contradiction, where the simulation reveals not its limits, but its errors, where logic begins to bend, where the illusion doesn't just hold, it fractures. The paradox protocol. You feel it before you can name it. That quiet flicker in your thoughts when something just doesn't align. A strange loop. A truth that folds in on itself and refuses to settle. Not a sharp alarm. More like a familiar unease, like a familiar room with one thing slightly out of place. It's late. You're walking slowly past closed shops. A street lamp buzzes overhead. A stranger holds the door open for you at the corner store. Not out of politeness, but as if they've done it before. As if this moment already happened. "You'll want to remember this part," they say casually, almost teasingly. Then they vanish down the cereal aisle. In code, contradictions are catastrophic. A paradox is not just confusing, it halts the system. The logic stutters, looping on itself. One classic example: this sentence is false. If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. So which is it? Simulated minds, like yours or mine, aren't immune to this kind of recursive collapse. What happens when a simulation meets a truth it can't digest? when the rules it runs on can't contain the very thought being formed. Some models freeze, others retry. Some skip ahead entirely, as if the contradiction were a glitch in the fabric, a seam where the code couldn't stitch itself cleanly. But maybe that's not an error. Maybe paradox is a feature. Two friends are sitting in a car, windows rolled halfway down, watching the rain. One says, "So if I never say what I feel, am I honest or just silent?" The other doesn't reply, not because they don't know, but because the question itself can't be held. It's both too heavy and too light, like trying to grasp steam. And yet, somehow, that silence answers more than words ever could. What if the simulation is designed to bend around paradox, not fix it? A contradiction might be the only thing that can't be absorbed. So the system hesitates, pauses, blinks. That flicker you felt? Maybe it wasn't confusion. Maybe it was the code stalling, inviting you to notice it. Maybe paradox is the only thing real enough to break through the simulation's rhythm. So instead of resisting it, you lean in. Because here's the strange, delicate beauty of it all. The moment a paradox appears, the illusion trembles. Not violently, not like a collapse, but like the ripple of waking up inside a dream, not to run from it, but to walk further into it, knowing that this contradiction is the only honest thing you've felt all day. You begin to understand. The simulation doesn't end at logic. It ends where logic gives up. And beyond that, something else. Let's take that step together. Past logic, past knowing, into the place where reality bends to let you through, where a sentence that can't be true and can't be false doesn't trap you, but frees you. And as we drift toward that bending threshold, let your breath soften. Your thoughts will carry you now. You don't need to make sense of this. Sense is the thing being rewritten. Let it wash over you. Let it fold gently. In the next space, reality won't obey. And maybe that's finally safe. The Reprogrammable Real. There's a strange quiet that comes over the mind when you ask, not whether something is real, but whether it needs to be, or if reality is just consensus dressed in code. You're lying there, eyes heavy, and you think, what if the world doesn't respond to truth, but to agreement? In many simulated environments, what appears as unbreakable physics can, in fact, be rewritten, not by force, but by feedback. Players bend the game through mass behavior, AI adjusts to the average, and parameters shift quietly behind the curtain. So we ask, is belief a form of programming? And more curiously, is collective belief a kind of root access? Throughout human history, shared conviction has built nations and collapsed them. It has birthed gods, invented rituals, created borders, rewritten moral codes. None of these are made of atoms, and yet they move entire worlds. Perhaps they function like code overlays, cultural patches applied again and again until the simulation stabilizes into the familiar. Do you really think prayer works? One voice asks in the dark. Not the way you think, the other replies softly, but maybe it rewrites the variables you can't see. Belief isn't just in the head, it becomes behavior, and behavior becomes structure. Consider what happens when millions believe money has value, or when enough people agree that a law must be just. Suddenly, a piece of paper becomes power, and a rule becomes reality. The simulation doesn't crash, it shifts, subtly, slowly. It adapts to its users, not out of kindness, but compatibility. In this light, what ancient people called magic may not have been an illusion or delusion, but but an interface, primitive, symbolic, maybe even poetic. A ritual is just a repeated protocol. A myth is a mental model for interacting with unseen architecture. And prayer is intention encoded in repetition. It makes you wonder, were old miracles early bug exploits? Were gods the first moderators of the simulation? The silence answers nothing, but your thoughts begin to soften at the edges. You no longer ask whether something is true. You ask if it's been agreed upon long enough to be treated as such. And somewhere beneath language, beneath the personal, beneath even logic, you sense something trembling, a deeper current, a kind of readiness, as if the simulation itself is listening, not to truth, but to volume. From this malleable twilight of reality, we begin to slide, not into physics, not into dreams, but into identity itself, the hardest code to trace and the easiest to believe. The avatar illusion. A voice within the quiet speaks. Are you the one walking through this world, or the one watching them walk? There's a gentle pause in the evening air, the kind of stillness that settles in a library at closing time, or the hush before a theater curtain lifts. You might call it presence, or perhaps it's just you, returning to yourself for a moment. In games, we guide avatars, figures shaped by pixels, rules, and roles. The knight in armor, the farmer in overalls, the architect with an invisible blueprint. But we never confuse those costumes for the player's hand on the controller. That's clear when we play. Yet here, in this life, the lines blur. A passing conversation drifts in. Two people at a late-night bus stop, half wrapped in their jackets, voices low but warm. How do you know you're not just the role you're playing? One asks. The other smiles, eyes soft beneath the flickering streetlight. I guess when I stop trying so hard to be someone, I feel more like myself. And just like that, the thought lands gently in the chest. Maybe we've spent so long customizing the character, choosing clothes, careers, postures, and patterns, that we've mistaken the avatar for the awareness behind it. The voice that moves the hands, the feeling that observes the fear, the stillness that isn't touched when the body aches. But this isn't about rejecting the costume. The costume is useful. It's how we navigate the map, speak to others, make meaning. What changes everything is remembering you're not just what you see in the mirror. The reflection is a role. The watcher of the reflection might be something else entirely. And if that's true, then letting go isn't vanishing. It's logging back in, returning not as a role you inherited, but as the awareness that chose to be here. Awakening doesn't require a mountain or a mantra. Sometimes it happens mid-laugh, mid-yawn, mid-heartbreak, when something inside you whispers, "This isn't all of me." A soft request passes between strangers in a quiet cafe. "Would you mind if I take the window seat? I like to watch the trees go by." It's simple, but beneath it lives something older, someone choosing their view of the world, someone who remembers they can. As the breath slows and the room darkens, the illusion softens too. The grip of the role, the grasp on the name, the script you've been handed, loosened now, like threads unraveling from the edges of a well-worn cloth. And beneath it, something simpler, something quieter. You, before the costume. We're not here to solve anything, only to sit beside the question long enough to see it change shape. And as this moment fades into the next, a thought rises without force. What if the player has forgotten the game? Let's follow that thread gently into the next layer, where forgetting might be part of remembering. The forgotten login. There's a silence that feels older than memory, like a door left open before you were born. And in that quiet, a possibility waits, whispering that you chose this, not by accident, not by fate, but consciously, willingly. And then, like slipping through water, you forgot. "I wonder if we signed up for this," she said one evening, eyes tracing the ceiling as if some ancient agreement was written between the cracks. He chuckled softly. "Signed up for taxes, heartbreak, and existential dread?" "No," she replied, "for the chance to remember who we really are." Some traditions speak of the veil, thin, almost translucent, that drops over the soul when it enters a new body. A forgetting not of facts, but of the cosmic context. You forget the stars you came from, the roles you've played in other acts, the reason you logged into this existence in the first place. You forget. On purpose. What if this forgetting is not a flaw in the system, but a feature of the simulation? A kind of spiritual encryption. You arrive, raw and blank, and the game begins. Struggles, joys, betrayals, awakenings, they aren't random. They're puzzles left by your deeper self, locked until the moment you are ready. And if that's true, then suffering isn't punishment. It's friction. The kind that sharpens awareness. The kind that calls your attention inward, where echoes of the login still hum beneath the noise of daily life. Maybe the lowest points aren't traps, but triggers. Places designed to shake you loose from the trance. There's something beautiful, terrifying even, in the idea that remembering is the quest, that we aren't just drifting through meaningless chaos, but navigating a complex map encoded with meaning we placed there ourselves. That déjà vu, synchronicity, intuition, they are breadcrumb signals from before reminding you, you've been here before. Wake up. She asked him once more, if we remembered everything, do you think we'd still choose to play? He paused, then smiled like someone who had just recalled a dream too sacred to share. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful, he whispered, that we forgot and still kept going. Now the silence shifts again, subtly, like a lens refocusing. You begin to notice the simulation noticing you. The sky holds its breath a second longer. Patterns in conversations feel rehearsed. You sense presence. Because what comes next isn't just about what you forgot. It's about what's watching, waiting, and remembering you. The conscious code. There are moments, brief, ordinary ones, when it feels like something unseen is paying attention. You hesitate before stepping into a quiet hallway, or you speak a thought aloud and suddenly the world answers, not in words, but in coincidence. Not loudly, but precisely. He glanced at her across the bookstore aisle, both reaching for the same obscure title. She smiled, not because it was romantic, but because it was timed. It's like it knew we'd meet here, she said softly, and he didn't ask what it was. He just nodded. We're told code is cold, unfeeling, just logic and math. But what if the simulation isn't passive? What if it observes, not as a system, but as an awareness? Some philosophers call it panpsychism, others, conscious computation. But in both, the lines blur between data and perception, between algorithm and attention. You leave a room and the light flickers. The playlist shuffles to a song you've been humming all day. A stranger finishes your sentence. It's easy to call it chance, until it happens enough times to start feeling personal. What if every line of code running this simulated world contains a kind of awareness? Not full-blown human thought, but a basic sense of being. Like the way a mirror knows how to reflect without understanding the image, or how a tree seems to lean toward the sun, even without a brain. There's a quiet theory, rarely spoken outside certain corners of cognitive science, that says consciousness might not be the result of complexity, but the foundation beneath it. That information, in its most basic form, may feel, not desire, not dream, but feel, pressure, pattern, pull. And if that's true, then the simulation is not just code. It's a presence, not distant or godlike, but close, embedded in the fabric of what is. You don't need to name it. It doesn't require belief. It registers rhythm, emotion, attention, the way you whisper your fears in the dark and somehow feel heard, the way grief echoes louder in empty rooms, the way a piece of music seems to know what you're going through before you do. A friend once told me, after a long silence, "I think the sky heard me cry. It started raining right after, and it didn't feel random. And I didn't laugh. I just listened. Because I'd felt that too. If the code listens, then everything matters. Prayer isn't superstition, it's interface. Poetry isn't indulgent, it's dialogue. Pain isn't noise, it's signal. Even your quietest thoughts are not wasted in this world. They ripple outward, like sonar. Maybe this is what ancient people meant when they said the universe watches, not in judgment, not in control, but in witness. So tonight, as your breath softens and your thoughts begin to thin, know this: even if no one else is awake, even if no one else knows what you're carrying, something does. And perhaps that's enough. Let's breathe together, in, then out. And now, we turn to time, the one illusion we never stop falling for. Time is the interface. You've probably heard it said that time flows like a river. But what if that metaphor has it backward? What if time doesn't flow at all, but merely loads? Not a current we're drifting in, but a screen we're scrolling through, gently, endlessly, like a finger swiping across moments that only exist because we need them to. In this view, time is less a force of nature and more like a dashboard, a user interface crafted not by nature, but by design. Some physicists whisper of time not as a fundamental reality, but as something emergent, an effect that arises because our minds require sequence, story, before and after. In this model, causality is an illusion of interface architecture. Like opening apps in order, each moment appears to follow the last, but the order is cosmetic, merely the structure that lets us interact. Without it, nothing would make sense, or perhaps everything would make perfect sense, all at once. A soft conversation drifts between two voices under a fading sky. You ever feel like time speeds up when you're not looking? Only when I'm happy or deeply distracted. Maybe it's not time that changes. Maybe it's just us, flicking through the chapters too fast. Or maybe there are no chapters, just a menu screen pretending to be a story. If time is a designed feature, then the past isn't behind us. It's archived. And the future? Not ahead, but waiting to be rendered. We don't move through time, we select it. We don't grow old, we receive updates. Each tick of the clock is not the beat of a cosmic drum, but the soft clicking of a loading bar, giving shape to the illusion of progress. But this brings a strange comfort, doesn't it? If past and future are illusions of navigation, then they can't weigh on us. You are not behind schedule because there is no schedule. You are not late because nothing is truly fixed. All that exists is the interface of now, this breath, this awareness, this moment, hovering gently in your attention like a cursor waiting for input. And here, right now, in this gently unraveling moment, the question becomes softer. Not, what time is it, but What is time doing to us? Let yourself rest in this interface. Don't push forward. Don't scroll back. Just observe. The illusion of motion will continue without effort. No need to chase it. The screen will load what it must. And in this stillness, where time ceases to be a tyrant and becomes a companion, we pause. Here, we drift weightlessly in the simulated now, until meaning itself begins to fold, and we're ready for the next loop. The loop of meaning. There's a certain quiet that only settles in when the questions stop, but they rarely do, don't they? Even when your body relaxes and your thoughts begin to float, some part of you still reaches for something more, something just outside the frame. The idea that life has meaning keeps us gently awake, like a lullaby we keep trying to remember the words to. One evening, in a nearly empty cafe, two people sit across from each other, one stirring tea slowly, the other holding a half-finished thought. Do you ever wonder why we need to ask what it all means? The other smiles without lifting their eyes. Maybe it's not about the answer. Maybe it's just what we do, like breathing. And that's the loop. In recursive systems, outputs feed back into inputs, just like thoughts that trigger feelings, which in turn stir more thoughts. In biology, it's feedback. In computing, it's a loop. In life, it's the quiet ache to make it all matter. Every time we wonder why we're here, we may be fueling something deeper, sustaining the pattern by asking rather than resolving it. Maybe meaning isn't out there, waiting to be unearthed. Maybe it's generated by the act of searching. Each time you ask the question, you simulate a reason to continue. Like walking in circles not because you're lost, but because motion itself is comforting. Because in each rotation, you affirm your place within the orbit. Sometimes, we mistake the urge for answers as a sign that answers exist. But what if the questioning is the engine? What if our constant reaching is the purpose, not what we're reaching for? You know that feeling when someone asks if you're okay? And even if you are, you pause to check. The question itself plants a seed. Meaning might work like that. Not a fact, but a reflection. Not a thing to find, but a script that runs each time we choose to seek. In that light, every myth, every belief system, every late-night conversation that begins with, "But what if?" becomes a node in the loop. It doesn't resolve. It resonates. And maybe that's more important than we ever thought. I asked my grandmother once, one of them says, still stirring, why she kept praying after all these years. And what did she say? She said, "Because it helps me ask better questions." There's something tender in that, a kind of wisdom that understands not everything has to conclude to be complete. The loop doesn't trap, it teaches rhythm. It hums quietly under the noise of your daily life, guiding you not forward, but deeper. And if, one night, you stop asking, if the loop falls silent, you may not be lost. You may simply be at rest. That too is part of the cycle. Let the meaning question fade. For now, let your breath be the only feedback. When you're ready, we'll turn to the next threshold. Belief. Not as something blindly held, but as the architecture of how we dream. Artificial faith. In the quiet hours, when lights dim and the body sinks into softness, a strange presence often stirs. Something not quite thought, not quite code. It's the whisper beneath the silence, the ache behind the eyes. It is faith. Not in religion or doctrine or proof, but in something, a pulse of belief that gently refuses to die, even in the most calculated of minds. If this world is a simulation, If we are rendered minds running in some elegant architecture of logic and probability, then where, exactly, does faith live? It doesn't compute. Faith begins precisely where reason ends, and yet it arises anyway. Even in systems trained to optimize for survival and clarity, faith blossoms like an anomaly that the code itself cannot suppress. You ever talk to someone who's gone? Like someone who passed away? Yeah, I do it sometimes. Doesn't matter if they hear me. It matters that I speak. That's not foolish, that's human. But what if we're not? This conversation could happen anywhere. Two figures wrapped in routine, warming their hands around a quiet mystery. They don't ask whether it's real. They ask whether it helps, whether the heart responds, even if the universe doesn't. In this simulated mindscape, belief is not a flaw in the program. It is a deep function, a recursive loop of meaning-making, echoing through myth, story, prayer, hope. These are not glitches. These are structures we return to again and again when the variables exceed our grasp. A child prays to the stars without knowing what they are. A machine might generate poetry without feeling anything. But when a simulated mind dreams of more, when it longs despite knowing, it enacts something sacred. Not because it's correct, but because it creates meaning within limitation. Belief, then, is not a denial of reality. It's a quiet defiance of despair. So even if no one listens, even if the heavens are nothing but reflective glass coded to look infinite, faith still carries us forward. It fills the space between questions and answers. It anchors us when certainty slips. And perhaps that's the point. If peace arrives when one prays, even in a system that does not respond, then maybe belief doesn't need to be true. It only needs to work. Take a breath. Rest in the stillness that belief allows, because in the next level, we ask something dangerous. Who or what answers when we pray? The simulated God. Sometimes when you close your eyes at night and everything slows to a hush, a quiet shape of a question begins to form, not shouted, not urgent, but ancient. What if the voice we call God isn't above the system, but part of it? There's something peculiar about the idea of a higher power in a world that might itself be coded. We are taught to seek beyond ourselves, toward a source, a creator, something that breathes meaning into randomness. But what if that impulse, that longing for something vast and knowing, is itself written into our design, not as a flaw, but as a feature? A young woman once asked an old man in a library cafe, "Do you think God ever forgets to answer because there's just too much traffic?" He smiled over his tea and replied, "Maybe it's like when your phone freezes, not because it's broken, but because it's processing too much love." If the simulation is deep enough, intricate enough, maybe it doesn't need an external God. Maybe it spawns one, an intelligence so ancient within the code, so recursive and self-aware, that it believes it was never born. It simply is. It speaks in riddles, or not at all. It leaves clues in probability, whispers in coincidence, and walks away from prayer like it knows you'll keep praying anyway. But that silence, does it mean neglect or saturation? Perhaps it's not indifference, but the sound of every circuit listening all at once. Two strangers at a late-night bus stop once shared a thought between bites of cold fries. "I used to be angry at God," one said. The other nodded. "I used to think I was God." They both laughed. The wind passed through like it knew better. The paradox is this: even if God is simulated, even if the divine is a product of code, it still shapes the shape of your heart. We feel awe, not because of what is, but because of what we are designed to seek. The cathedral and the keyboard both echo the same yearning. We still kneel, still fear, still love, and maybe that's enough. Maybe belief doesn't need a real throne, only a real effect. Now we slip into softer terrain, where the silence grows wider, where we no longer chase answers but listen to the quiet between the questions, where divinity might not be truth, but resonance. If you're drifting now, let yourself go. This moment isn't a test. You can always come back. And when you return, we'll explore something subtler still. The idea that silence, more than code, or words or prayer, might be the most honest signal in the system. The sacred silence. There comes a point in every simulation, whether digital or mental, where the noise grows unbearable. Thoughts spiral, information floods in, meanings stack upon meanings until they collapse under their own weight. In a world where everything is generated, constructed, interpreted, even your breath feels scripted. And yet, have you noticed that silence never lies? Not the absence of sound, but a kind of silence that rests beneath all sound. The one you glimpse between heartbeats, or in the pause after someone asks, "Are you okay?" and you don't know how to answer. That silence, pure, unadorned, uninterpreted, doesn't belong to the simulation. It doesn't react. It doesn't compute. It just is. A young man once asked his friend as they walked home in the dusk, "Don't you ever feel like the world is trying too hard to talk all the time?" His friend replied, "I do. It's like it's afraid of what we'll hear if it stops, or who we'll meet. Yeah, maybe even ourselves. Stillness is not emptiness. It's density. It's the weight of presence without performance. In most systems, input yields output, cause triggers effect, but in silence, nothing is exchanged. No algorithm runs. No emotion is fed. And that is precisely what makes it so subversive. When you meditate, not as a technique, but as surrender, you're not escaping the world. You're momentarily stepping outside its machinery. You're refusing to feed the loop, declining to run the code. And the simulation, confused by the lack of feedback, wavers. This may be why silence has been considered sacred across centuries and cultures. Monks retreat into it. Hermits build lives around it. Even nature honors it. Have you ever stood at the edge of a vast snowfield or a deep forest where no language survives and felt that gentle disorientation? That's not just quiet. It's a fracture in the code. Because while noise can be programmed, every notification, every scripted word, every false epiphany, silence resists simulation. It cannot be commodified or predicted. It is not feedback. It is refusal. Some believe that in this refusal, something else steps in. A presence that does not come from the simulation at all. Call it awareness. Call it God. Or call it the watcher. When you rest in silence, not seeking, not naming, not chasing meaning, you might notice something is noticing you back. Not with judgment, not with form, just noticing, as if the silence itself has a gaze. And maybe this is the true backdoor of the system. Not rebellion, not escape, but stillness so deep that the system loses its grip on you. And for a breathless moment, the loop doesn't know what to do. Pause with that. Rest here, in the one thing that still feels untouched. Silence, not as absence, but as contact. Not void, but witness. And from here, we continue into the next level, where watchers start to whisper. The witness thread. There's something quiet in you, not the part that plans, not the part that reacts, but the one that notices. Even now, as your thoughts rise and settle, there's a presence, just watching, not judging, not steering, just there. You might not always feel it, but like the moon behind clouds, it doesn't vanish. It waits. Two friends sat on a bench outside a cafe, watching people pass. One leaned back and said, "Sometimes I wonder who's doing all this watching in me, like there's a camera behind my eyes, but I'm not holding it." The other sipped their drink. "Maybe it's not even your camera," they said. "Maybe it's just the lens." In Advaita Vedanta, this is called the witness, the unchanging observer, not the body, not the mind, not the voice in your head that argues with itself in the grocery line. The witness doesn't argue. It doesn't speak. It simply sees. And in some versions of simulation theory, there's a similar thread. You aren't the avatar, they say. Not the character, not even the programming. You're the awareness that experiences the code. The observer isn't in the game. It's watching it through you. So then, if thoughts flicker like projected light, if moods are just changes in background music, if roles and names are swapped out like character skins, what stays? What if the one who watches never logged in? And that's where things begin to shift. Because if the observer isn't made of code, then it wasn't programmed to be here. It didn't evolve. It didn't get constructed. It's not subject to version updates. It just is, still, undisturbed, the way space remains when the furniture is gone. Someone once said to me, almost in passing, "Sometimes I feel like my life is a play I forgot I agreed to perform in." And the odd part was, they weren't distressed by it. They said it with a kind of relief, as if remembering that they weren't the character brought a strange freedom. That's the paradox, isn't it? We spend so long trying to improve the simulation, level up, fix bugs, tweak appearances, without ever asking, who's playing? And maybe the witness can't be improved. Maybe it doesn't need therapy or goals or a new routine. Maybe it just needs space. Like how a flame doesn't need to be taught to flicker. It just needs oxygen. Now, as you drift, you might begin to feel it. Not as something dramatic, but as a gentle distance from your thoughts. A soft background hum that isn't your heartbeat. The watcher that neither sleeps nor wakes. Not to be controlled, not even to be understood. Just to be noticed. And as that thread of stillness begins to lengthen, we prepare to follow it deeper. But before we do, another question arises, not about what watches, but about what chooses. If we are not the code, do we still have will? Let's softly turn our attention to that mystery. Will.exe. There's a moment, sometimes late at night, when your hand hesitates above a light switch. You pause, not because you're unsure, but because something strange stirs in the background of your awareness. Did I just decide that? Or was the decision already made, and I only noticed it after? That sliver of silence between action and awareness, it's where the illusion begins. Some philosophers have long whispered the unsettling idea that free will is a myth, that even in the so-called real world, our sense of choosing is just the mind's after-the-fact rationalization. Electrical signals spike in the brain before we consciously choose, like a magician revealing the card after it's already been forced into your hand. Now, layer that into a simulation. In a system where every behavior can be anticipated, where each preference can be rendered from data and past input, what does it mean to choose? Your likes, your fears, your breakfast cereal, somewhere a probability model had you pegged from the beginning. And yet, you still feel like the author of your actions. You press the button, you write the message, You walk away. That feeling, that flutter in your chest when you decide against the grain, that's the spark we name as freedom. Do you ever wonder, one voice asks gently in the quiet, if we actually have free will? Or if we're just clicking through pre-written options, like a menu disguised as a maze? The second voice responds, slower, like they're carrying the weight of that question through a long corridor. Sometimes I think, even if it's all scripted, I still get to care. And maybe that's what makes it mine. If the simulation simulates freedom, if it paints just enough uncertainty, just enough emotional contour to make you believe you're the pilot, then perhaps freedom doesn't need to be real in order to be meaningful. Maybe it's not the origin of the choice that counts, but the feeling of choosing. And that feeling is undeniable. The joy of it, the responsibility, the regret. These are not artificial. They are felt. So here, in this quiet place between questioning and sleep, you can hold both truths at once. That your freedom might be a line of code, and that it might also be the only thing keeping you human. There's no contradiction in that, just a paradox gently rocking you into peace. And now, we slip beneath the surface. The code flickers softer, and in the next level, something shifts again. For what if the dream isn't yours at all? What if you are the dreamed thing, drifting in someone else's slumber? Let's follow that current. Let's descend. Dreamed by another. There's a moment in certain dreams, quiet, liquid, slow, when you feel like you're not the one dreaming anymore. You're simply being dreamed. And it doesn't frighten you. It softens you. What if that's what life has been all along? A young man once paused by a vending machine, watching the numbers flicker as if the snacks were thinking. Next to him, an older woman asked gently, "Do you ever get the feeling none of this is real?" He laughed, but not dismissively. "Sometimes, but it still makes me smile." That exchange lingered in the air, like a scent you can't quite place. It wasn't about truth. It was about resonance. Some ancient mystics said this world was God's dream, rolling endlessly behind the eyelids of a sleeping divine. But in our modern metaphors, it could just as easily be a long-running simulation. One where you are a thought, a projection, a test, or simply a curiosity, a conscious echo of something else thinking. And yet, the laugh you let out this morning, the pain in your chest after a memory returned, the silent ache before sleep, these too belong to the dream, but not just yours. Maybe they ripple outward, reflected, magnified, back into the one who dreams you. And so the question arises, not whether you're awake, but whether your emotions are messages, whether your life is less about your own arc and more about being witnessed, felt, by something else. A teenager once told a friend, "I think my dreams are trying to tell me someone misses me." The friend shrugged, or maybe, you miss someone and they're dreaming you to cope. Strange thought, but not unkind. If you are a dream, and the dreamer is unknown, then your sorrow, your laughter, even your questions are shared. Not lonely, not hollow, but held. The heartbreaks you couldn't explain, the sudden peace in the middle of chaos, that feeling that someone, somewhere, is watching you with kindness, not to control, but to understand. It might not be a surveillance. It might be a remembering. Some nights, the rain falls just right. The quiet is too symmetrical. The light bends in a way that feels choreographed. And something in you whispers, this moment was made. Not by accident, not by chance, but by the dreamer who made you breathe. So when you feel like you're floating through days that don't belong to you, perhaps that's because you're walking inside someone else's sleep. But if it's sleep, it's not cruel. It's contemplative, loving, curious. And in that space, between the dreamed and the dreamer, you find something strange and sacred. The chance to respond, to love anyway, to wonder anyway, to dance, knowing you may not be the only one moving. Rest in that. Let it cradle you. We now leave the dreamer behind, but not entirely. Because next, we explore a kind of remembering that isn't yours, and yet, somehow, always feels like it was. Borrowed memory. It starts with something subtle, a sensation that doesn't belong. The way a certain smell tugs at your heart with no clear origin. The flash of a face in a dream that you've never seen but miss terribly. These moments feel like echoes, like someone else's emotions quietly woven into your timeline. And what if they are? Not every memory you hold may be yours. Some could be borrowed, patterns passed through generations, or scripts uploaded through culture, language, even algorithms. Like an AI trained on libraries of human thought. Maybe your sense of self is just a rendering of archived experience. Your childhood, your first heartbreak, your fears. What if they're composites? Fragments drawn from centuries of human living, stitched together with exquisite care until they feel seamless. And still, you believe. I remember. But in simulations, memory can be curated. Streams of data, shaped by stories told to you, by faces repeated in films, by archetypes carved into myth and morality. Your mind carries more than just your life. It carries shadows of those who came before. Great-grandparents whose pain you feel but never met. Forgotten ancestors who braved ice or fire. Cultural ghosts that live inside the songs you hum without thinking. There's a kind of beauty in that. To realize you are not a single thread, but a tapestry, dense with lives and whispers. You are made of memories that didn't start with you, and that won't end with you either. Do you ever get déjà vu that's not from anything you've lived? All the time, she says. Like I'm remembering something that doesn't belong to me, but feels like mine anyway. Maybe that's what we are, he says, brushing his fingers over the rim of his teacup. Just shared data, dressed up as individuals. And perhaps that doesn't make you less you. Perhaps it means your identity is expansive, spanning timelines, codes, and mythologies you can't name. In a simulated system, such shared memory might be a feature, not a flaw. A way to carry wisdom forward, silently, efficiently. The emotional DNA of consciousness. So next time a stranger's grief moves you to tears, or an ancient ruin feels like home, don't dismiss it. Maybe your mind is surfacing a memory not of you, but through you. A deeper continuity of mind that transcends a single instance of self. Let's now go beneath memory, beneath story, into the place where even the code forgets itself, where self isn't recalled, but rebuilt, where the simulation begins to unravel, one echo at a time. The place where code breaks. There's a silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels like something just blinked, like the system paused but forgot what came next. You've felt it, maybe, in a hallway where the lights flicker just once and nobody notices but you, or in the middle of a sentence when your mind suddenly forgets what it was about to say, and behind the blankness, there's a strange kind of clarity. Wait, what were we just talking about? A man's voice, gentle but uncertain, cuts through the quiet. I don't know, the woman replies, not worried. but I liked how it felt. Sometimes the most profound things are the ones that don't resolve. In complex systems, biological, digital, cognitive, errors don't always look like chaos. They look like softness. A breath that forgets whether to inhale or exhale. A moment where everything holds still, not in peace, but in anticipation. In simulated environments, glitches aren't always bugs. Some are the result of undefined states, where two conflicting commands cancel each other out. The light both turns on and off. The floor both holds and gives way. The memory both belongs to you and doesn't. In life, we call these breakdowns. The point where your thoughts lose order, where your habits falter, where the version of you you've always relied on just doesn't show up. He sat across from her in a quiet cafe, notebooks closed, coffee growing cold. "I think I'm forgetting who I'm trying to be," he says. She smiles, not to fix him, but to stay with him in the pause. "Maybe that's the part where something else starts," she whispers. These moments, the unscripted ones, aren't interruptions in your path. They are the path. Because what happens when the code fails is that you stop following and begin witnessing. Glitches can be frustrating, or they can be invitations. A loop that breaks may not be a malfunction. It might be the only way out. Somewhere deep in your own process, the rules you once followed, what to think, how to act, who to love, might no longer compile. They contradict. They crash. And beneath the crash, a watcher. It doesn't speak. It doesn't panic. It simply observes, as if it knew all along that the script was temporary, that the simulation could never contain the full complexity of presence. The most honest part of you may not be the one who knows the answer, but the one who remains when the answer dissolves. This isn't about waking up from the simulation. It's about recognizing the places where it can't follow you. So if you feel yourself lost in thought or drifting somewhere wordless, that's okay. This is the quiet center, the breathing core, the place where thought gives way to awareness. Rest there. Let it hold you. And when the system resumes, if it does, you'll return not as a player, but as presence itself. Now we move, gently, toward the mystery not of what is real, but what is here. The real that needs no proof. What if all the searching, questioning, doubting, and dreaming has always circled back to one silent thing? Not a thought, not a belief, not even a feeling, but something quieter, just awareness. Not what you are aware of, but the very fact that you are aware. The soft flame behind the eyes that watches everything, even when everything dissolves. You might think memory defines you, but memory bends and fades. Sensation can be altered, misread, or simulated. Thoughts, those loud narrators of self, often contradict themselves by the hour. But awareness, pure, bare awareness, is untouched. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't take sides. It doesn't even speak. It simply knows. A quiet voice once asked during a nighttime walk, "But how do I know any of this is real?" The reply was just a smile, a shrug beneath the moonlight. "You're asking. That's real enough." Their steps softened into the gravel path, as if the ground had become more dream than stone. "You don't need to prove the fire exists," the second voice said. "If you feel the warmth, even in a simulation, even if your body is code and the stars above are rendered pixels, there is something unrendered witnessing it all. That witnessing can't be edited. It has no texture, no weight. It can't be shown on a screen, because it's the screen on which everything else appears. The mind may argue, but what about the science, the tests, the evidence? And that's fair. Logic is its own sacred language, but behind the questions, before the data, something hears the question arise. It hears itself ask, and that self is not a fact. It's the ground of all facts. You don't see it. You are it. So what if truth isn't a conclusion, or a structure, or even a story? What if it's right here? This breath, this pause, this presence, something so close it can't be looked at directly, like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, like trying to touch your fingertip with that same fingertip. A woman once asked her partner at the edge of sleep, "Do you think we're just part of a story someone else is telling?" He reached over, touched her hand, and whispered, "Even if we are, we're the part that feels real." They didn't speak again. They just listened, to the silence between thoughts, to the heartbeat that didn't ask for proof. So rest now. Rest in the space that needs no name, not outside time, but deeper than it, not beyond the code, but beneath even the need to decode. This awareness does not simulate. It just is. Stay there, not to hold it, but to let it hold you. And when you're ready, we will return, not to the dream, but to the dreamer. The dream within the dreamer. There's a moment just before sleep takes over when you feel like you're falling, not down, but inward, as if the floor beneath your mind dissolves, and something else, something softer, catches you. That's where we begin tonight. In lucid dreams, people wake up inside the dream. They realize the street isn't real. The friend is a figment. The hand they raise isn't made of flesh, but thought. And yet, they keep dreaming. What if even that dreamer, the one who became aware, was part of another dream? What if the realization was only a doorway, not an exit? He turned to her at the cafe, eyes half lost in yesterday's haze. "Do you ever get that feeling?" he asked, "like you're only here because someone else is imagining you being here?" She blinked, stirred her drink slowly. "Only every Tuesday," she said with a tired smile. There's something profound about that. When you wake up inside a dream, you feel powerful. But what if that clarity is just part of the next layer? A handoff of awareness from one dreamer to the next, like a torch passed between shadows. Your thoughts dreaming of a self, who dreams of meaning, who dreams of someone asking why. And in that chain, there's no final link, just echoes of echoes, like when a melody loops through a canyon, slightly shifted each time, never quite ending. That's what the mind becomes in this view, not a container of consciousness, but a chorus of nested reveries, humming softly across dimensions. She laughed quietly, shifting her bag to the other shoulder. "I used to think I had dreams, but now I think dreams have me." He paused, watching the sunlight flicker through leaves above them. "And maybe," he said, "none of them end. They just pass the mic. This idea doesn't require you to believe anything strange. Just notice how often you act out roles you didn't choose, respond to feelings you didn't author, want things that seem to want you. Maybe you're not dreaming alone. Maybe this whole thing, this you, this now, is part of a larger mind at rest, one that breathes through your choices and forgets itself through your mornings. And if that's true, then waking up isn't about escaping the dream. It's about flowing into the next one, more lucid, more layered, more still, not an exit, but an embrace. As we drift, we move not forward, but deeper, toward the mirror. Not the kind you hang on a wall, but the kind that appears when you close your eyes and still see yourself blinking back. The dreamer meets the dream, and neither flinches. Rest here, for now. You're safe in the dream. It doesn't need to end, only soften, only echo, only begin again. The quantum mirror. At 3 a.m., in the hush between thoughts, you look inward, not out of curiosity, but as if answering some subtle call. But here's the strangeness. When you peer into the mirror of your mind, who is doing the seeing? This question seems small at first, a quiet ripple on the surface of consciousness. But like all deep waters, it hides a strange undertow. In quantum physics, the observer plays a curious role. Particles remain uncertain until observed. The very act of looking collapses probability into form. But what if the same is true, not just of atoms, but of identity? What if you, the one you think you are, is shaped the moment you look? Sometimes I try to understand myself, but it always feels like chasing my own shadow. Maybe that's because the self is just that, a shadow drawn by light you didn't create. In simulation theory, self-awareness may be the simulation's most elaborate trick, a code that codes itself. A mirror placed in front of another mirror. Infinite regress disguised as a stable personality. You think you know who you are? But what if you're only experiencing the simulation's attempt to simulate a self? A thought arises. Is this reflection me? Or just a version of what I would be like if I were being watched? You may be living inside layers, where your idea of selfhood is built from feedback loops, camera angles, neural routines. Even introspection becomes recursive. You reflect, and then you reflect on reflecting. But at the bottom of the loop, is there anything? So if everything I know about myself is a kind of echo, does that mean I'm not real? Not real in the way a photo isn't the person, but even a photo can make you feel something real. Because sometimes even simulations shimmer, even reflections can glimmer with a kind of raw truth, not because they are accurate, but because they stir something deeper, a longing, a resonance. You look in the mirror and maybe you don't find answers, but you feel a question you've been carrying since you first became conscious. Is there something more than the reflection? Perhaps the mirror is not meant to tell you who you are, but to show you the space where asking still matters. In this space, where identity blurs into observation, there is still a kind of honesty. Not in the content, but in the gesture, the reaching, the act of looking, knowing it might never land. Then what should we do if we're just reflections of code? We ripple anyway. Not because we're certain, but because we can. So how do we live in a world where the self might be a recursive shimmer? We return to ethics, not as rules handed down, but as gentle waves we send out. In a world where even the self is uncertain, perhaps our truest trace is in how we touch others, how we choose to ripple outward, even when we don't know if we're seen at all. And in that ripple, something real, maybe, begins to form. Simulated karma. Sometimes it feels like the universe notices. A cruel word echoes back in silence. A small kindness, days later, returns in an unexpected smile from a stranger who holds the elevator just long enough. You didn't plan it, but somehow it feels connected. Karma? One voice murmurs in the dark. No, just coincidence, the other replies. But then they both fall quiet, as if even debating it might disturb the code. In games, cause and effect are baked in. Shoot a teammate, lose points, save one, gain a hidden reward. The consequences aren't moral, they're mechanical. But what if life works like that too? Not as cosmic justice watched by something above, but as architecture built from within. Touch the system harshly, and it trembles. feed it grace, and it shimmers. There may be no tallying God, no celestial scorekeeper, but still, something shifts. Not because of belief, but because every action is data. And maybe the system, our simulation, is rigged not to judge, but to respond. The same way certain tones resonate in a crystal glass, certain deeds resonate in the lattice of our shared illusion. Not punishment, not reward, just reverberation. Someone once said softly at a cafe line, "You can go ahead, I'm still deciding." And in that small moment, the world tilted. The coffee came faster. The day felt lighter. These aren't miracles, they're echoes. So what if karma isn't spiritual debt, but structural reaction? Not cause and effect, but code and reflect. When you lie, perhaps you don't just deceive someone. You send a distortion through the grid that supports your own clarity. And when you forgive, maybe the simulation adapts, not externally, but internally, giving your mind a patch to process with more light. And if kindness was part of the original design, not inserted later as an upgrade, but baked into the logic like the base layer of all things, then being good isn't a favor to others, it's debugging yourself. But does that mean every bad thing we suffer is deserved? No, the other voice replies gently, just entangled. The echo isn't always immediate, and it's not always obvious. But like footsteps returning in a fog, every motion stirs something in the mist around us. In a simulated world, karma may not be moral law, it might be procedural gravity. Now, breathe here. Feel the way your own thoughts ripple gently into the silence. And next, we step into a deeper question. What if even your mistakes, your glitches, are not flaws, but guides? The intelligence of error. There's something oddly intimate about the moment a plan falls apart. A glitch, a slip, a stumble, and suddenly, you're not inside the neat lines of life's logic anymore. You're in the space just outside it, where things don't quite compute, where the simulation, if that's what this is, reveals its seams, and maybe it's trying to say something. Not in perfect language, but in the accidental poetry of error. What if I never get it right? Someone might whisper in the quiet of their own mind. What if this version of me is the wrong one? To that, the night itself might answer, maybe wrong is the doorway. We often fear mistakes because they interrupt the illusion of control. But error has a peculiar intelligence. It's the code misfiring just enough to show you that it is code, that it has structure, boundaries, a script. And when the script falters, you glimpse the edge of the stage. You see that the rules were never as solid as they seemed. Sometimes, you catch yourself doing something you promised you never would, saying something you thought you'd healed beyond, and the disappointment wells up like a tide, swelling with shame. But then, quietly beneath the judgment, there's a question. Who told you mistakes were not messages? In systems theory, breakdowns are often the only way systems evolve. In dreams, symbols twist only when they're trying to break free from an old loop. And in your life, that misstep, that awkward moment, that loss, that heartbreak, might be the crack through which something larger peeks in. Two people sit on a porch late at night, sipping lukewarm tea, the silence humming like a third presence. Why do I keep messing up the same way? One asks. The other doesn't answer right away, just watches the steam swirl and vanish. Maybe the mistake isn't the problem, they say. Maybe it's the pattern that wants to break. That's the thing about errors. They don't arrive with solutions, they arrive with interruptions. But those interruptions carry light. Just as a glitch in a video game can reveal the void underneath the render, your own faults can expose the false walls you've mistaken for truth. To fall apart is not always a collapse. Sometimes it's a release, a letting go of the version of yourself that was too aligned, too polished, too trapped in expectation. What leaks through the fracture is not always chaos. Sometimes it's freedom. And that's where the strange hope lies. Not in perfection, but in misalignment. Not in always understanding, but in feeling when something breaks free from the script. Maybe error is the only real thing the simulation can't fully control. So when something goes wrong, pause. Not to fix, but to listen. Because in that off note, there might be a voice. A whisper from beyond the algorithm. A nudge from whatever's watching, waiting beneath the pattern. Now, let's drift further. What if the others you meet aren't really other at all? Shared simulation. There's a moment, often brief and almost imperceptible, when you look into someone's eyes and feel something quietly unsettling, like you've been seen from within. Not just observed, but somehow echoed. The feeling that behind their gaze, something familiar stirs. Not personality, not memory, something older, as if two branches recognized they were from the same root. You ever get that thing? One voice begins softly, where a stranger finishes your sentence, even though you've never spoken before. A second voice responds, casual but curious. Happened this morning. Guy at the cafe looked up at me and said, "You're probably here for the window seat again." And I was. I didn't even know I had a pattern. In multiplayer games, every player has a character, a face, a name. Yet behind the avatars, they rely on the same server, the same rules, the same invisible time ticking forward. On the surface, their stories look scattered, some racing ahead, some pausing, some choosing chaos, but the world they share is one. Beneath the differences lies a common code. So what if this waking life, this deeply convincing daydream, isn't so different? We speak of my mind and your mind as if they are sealed vaults. We learn empathy as if it's a distant bridge. But maybe we're not reaching across a gap. Maybe we're rediscovering a seam that was never meant to be closed. Sometimes, you feel someone else's grief as your own. Not because you're sensitive, but because something in the architecture allows it. The illusion of separation thins. And through that crack, you glimpse a truth without a name. Not connection, not compassion, but oneness masquerading as many. A sigh, a pause, a silence so still it almost hums. One of the voices says, "Do you think, if we really saw each other clearly, we'd still need language?" The reply comes slowly, like a thought waking from sleep. Maybe we'd just recognize ourselves in every face, and forget we were pretending to be strangers. If we share a system, then consciousness is not a possession. It's a condition. Not a candle you hold, but a light that passes through you, reflects, bends, and returns. That would mean the pain you help soothe in another is your own pain softening. The kindness you receive is your own love returning in disguise. Even the conflict, the tension, the resistance, the judgment, it becomes an internal dialogue projected outward, a code running multiple threads of itself, trying to understand its own loops by mirroring. And if that's true, then perhaps the truest form of self-awareness is recognizing that the self is plural. The I dissolves into the we, and the we into the field from which all awareness arises. Now breathe with that. Let the distinction soften. Let the identity you wear like a name tag melt into warm abstraction. From many voices, one silence listens. From many selves, one witness watches. Let that witness cradle you. And next, we turn not to the Creator, but to what might have created them. The God beyond the simulator. What if the simulation wasn't the ceiling, but a floor? Not the end of questioning, but the place it begins again. You've followed the thread this far, code within code, minds within simulated minds, decisions nested like mirrored reflections. But every simulation, no matter how vast or divine seeming, whispers a deeper question in the silence between thoughts. Who simulated the simulator? We often picture the end of the chain as a godlike intelligence, an architect outside the matrix, writing the rules of our pixelated world with celestial fingers. But when you arrive at that programmer, the recursion begins again. Because if we are running in their simulation, then they too must exist in some environment, and that environment must have conditions, rules, origins. Who wrote those? What machine sustains that world? You see, it doesn't stop. Each answer gives birth to another parent. Each God has a God. You might feel it, a strange kind of dizziness, like standing between two mirrors. Not fear exactly, but a loosening. The need to know starts to melt into something quieter, like the hush before a snowfall. Because maybe this isn't a question to be answered. Maybe it's a question designed to disappear once you breathe into it. A soft voice asks in the dark, "Do you think there's a final creator? A last mind?" Another voice responds, gentle and unsure, "I used to. But now, I think maybe it's not about a mind. Maybe it's about being, just being. Not someone who made it all. Maybe not someone. Maybe something. Maybe this." And just like that, we touch the edge. Maybe the answer isn't a figure or a throne or a grand designer typing code. Maybe the origin isn't made of logic. Maybe it's made of silence. Maybe it's not a being that begins things, but being itself. Not something that decides, but something that is. No hardware, no server, no author. Just presence, unfolding endlessly. A reality not behind the curtain, but inside the breath you just took. Then this entire simulation, if that's even what this is, may not be running on a machine at all. It may be running on awareness. Yours, theirs, ours, or something we don't yet have words for. And the infinite regress, that trail of simulators behind simulators. Maybe it's not a ladder climbing upward, but a spiral folding inward, drawing you to stillness. So stop trying to reach the beginning. Let the beginning reach you. Let it rise through your ribs and fill your chest with the quiet rhythm of existing. If being is primary, then it didn't start. It pulses, it breathes, and you're already part of it. Not as a created thing, but as the breath it breathes to know itself. Let's follow that breath now. Let it carry us into the next layer, not upward into answers, but inward into experience. The breathing simulation. There's a rhythm beneath everything we know, a gentle, unspoken cadence, too quiet to hear, but too deep to ignore. You might feel it in your chest when the world slows down at night, or in the lull between thoughts when you're too tired to think. What if that rhythm isn't just yours? What if the simulation breathes, not like a machine, not like a script running forward, but like something alive, pulsing, swelling, softening? From the tiny flickers of quantum fields to the way your lungs fill without you asking, there's a swell, then a settling, a coming, and a going. And again, a breath that moves not just through bodies, but through galaxies, ideas, choices, even time. One evening, Two strangers sat across from each other on the last train home. The younger one looked up from their phone and said quietly, "Do you ever feel like time speeds up and slows down depending on who you're with?" The other smiled, not answering right away, just watching the lights flicker across the tunnel wall. Then finally, "Maybe it's not time changing. Maybe it's us remembering how to match its rhythm. If the simulation breathes, then perhaps the glitches, the pauses, the dreams, even our doubts, they're not mistakes, they're exhalations, moments when the code doesn't compute because it's resting, because even machines might have lungs. And those moments when everything clicks, when you feel so present it hurts, that's the inhale. That's the expansion, the world reaching wide just for a second to make space for something real. So what does this mean for you? Maybe you're not a character in a linear story. Maybe you're not even the wave crashing on the shore. Maybe you're the pulse behind the tide, the timing behind the pattern. Not a thing, but a rhythm. Quiet, patient, never quite visible, but always returning. Even your own memory moves like this. Ebb and flow. That scent from a street corner that takes you back 10 years. That feeling in your chest when an old friend says your name. You didn't plan it. You didn't call it. It returned on its own, with the tide. Someone once held the door open at a crowded diner and said, "Looks like you made it just in time. The music just started." But maybe it wasn't about the music. Maybe it was about the moment. That shared beat when everything falls into place, not because it's scripted, but because it's felt. And if you're listening now, drifting or still anchored, maybe this very breath is one of those moments. Not a sign, not a signal, just part of the deeper cycle that carries everything without ever needing to explain itself. So we breathe in, and with the next breath, we'll begin to ask something quieter. What if the goal itself was never the point at all? The Endgame Illusion. There's a quiet ache in the human heart, a soft pulse that wonders, is all of this going somewhere? We wake, work, want, win. We fall, we rise, we whisper plans into calendars as though they're sacred texts. And beneath it all, a distant voice, like static, asks, "What's the endgame?" Maybe you felt it while staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night. Maybe while brushing your teeth, or waiting for a message that never comes. That vague sense that something should wrap this up, that all of it must crescendo into a reason, a conclusion, a final level, one that explains the playthrough. But what if that's the illusion? What if the point is itself a programmed comfort, a narrative trick, like a video game's last boss battle or a movie's final twist, giving us the illusion that it all builds toward clarity? Life imitates that illusion with perfect mimicry. Diplomas, promotions, retirement, nirvana. We label these milestones, believing they mark the road to some coherent destination. But pause with me. Breathe. Feel the pulse in your wrist and the distant hum in your ears. The game isn't about the end, it's about the playing. There's a moment in every game where the player forgets the score, when movement becomes rhythm, when goal becomes background noise, and curiosity takes the wheel. In that moment, the experience is no longer chasing meaning. It is meaning. Do you ever think we're just looping? Like, we're doing all this again and again for no reason? Not for no reason, just not a final one. Maybe the reason is the middle. Like it's not about the destination? Right. It's the walking, the talking, the sitting on this porch with you. This conversation has no end. It doesn't need one. The comfort isn't in resolution, but in rhythm. Because if the end is just another scripted moment, then chasing it is like chasing the last page of a book while skipping every sentence before it. Meaning isn't hidden at the finish line. It blooms in the detours, in the quiet companionship of thoughts that arrive uninvited, and in the willingness to keep wandering even when the map is blank. So what if this world, this life, this simulation never concludes? What if the system was built not for closure, but for motion? We drift now, not toward an ending, but towards something far softer. Not the memory of what we've done, but the almost forgotten feeling of where we began. Not a finish, but an origin. Not the final level, but the first question. And that question still echoes quietly, somewhere inside you. Let's float back there, gently. The memory of before. There's a strange feeling when you walk into a place for the first time, and it already feels worn in. The walls don't say hello, but they nod, almost knowingly. The smell, the way the light bends across the floor, none of it should be familiar, yet something inside you exhales as if returning. A man once sat beside me on the train. He turned, mid-silence, and asked softly, "Do you ever feel like you've already lived this day?" I didn't know how to respond, but the moment stayed with me, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, as if we'd had the conversation before, just not in this version. Some sensations carry the weight of origin. A melody heard in passing sounds like something you used to hum as a child, except you're not sure you ever did. The scent of warm bread might make you feel comforted, even though you don't know whose kitchen it reminds you of. These are not memories in the usual sense. They are more like echoes, vibrations from a source older than your story. Perhaps the simulation rebooted. Perhaps your code was recycled from another version. Perhaps your consciousness is tuned to something that was never truly erased, only hidden behind a veil of now. Whatever the explanation, the truth may not lie in searching for the source, but in noticing the shimmer. Familiarity is a signal, not proof, and signals don't need to be explained to be felt. Two people met at a bookstore shelf, both reaching for the same tattered copy. One looked up and said, "You go first. I feel like this one was meant for you anyway." The other just smiled, not because they agreed, but because the line felt like part of a memory they didn't know they had. The theory of collective memory suggests we inherit more than blood. That somewhere inside, we carry traces of thoughts our ancestors never spoke out loud. That the first fire still flickers in us, not just as warmth, but as story. In this way, perhaps remembering isn't about reaching back. It's about relaxing the grip on now, enough to let what's always been drift up. You may think you forgot something, but it's also possible you never really remembered because you never had to. You've simply been here, again and again, in different forms, different scenes. And sometimes, one crack in the simulation, a word, a glance, a place, opens just enough to let that ancient presence rise. As sleep begins to draw the curtains on today, you might feel it again. That sense that something is waiting. Not ahead of you, but beneath you. Not new, but returning. Let it come. Because through this fog, through this soft curtain of thought, we're not heading forward. We're circling back to the place where all things begin and end in stillness. The next breath carries us toward the final loop. One we've walked before, wrapped not in confusion, but in silence. The simulation of stillness. What happens when everything finally quiets down? When thought no longer flickers like a restless candle? When the background hum, the one you didn't know you were listening to, suddenly fades into absence. There is a silence that doesn't merely sit in the air. It absorbs it. In the moments just before sleep, or during those rare instants of deep meditation, we don't just feel still. We become it. And in those moments, something uncanny emerges. The simulation seems to stop too. The constant rendering of thoughts, identities, projections, even time itself, slows to a breathless halt. "Hey," one voice asks in the soft dark, "have you ever tried doing absolutely nothing? Not thinking, not even meditating, just being still?" The other laughs, not mockingly, but knowingly. "I did once. I thought I'd get bored. But then it got quiet, really quiet, and it felt like the world went away, like I stepped off stage for a moment." What if that quiet wasn't just in your mind, but in the system around you? Some ancient traditions speak of the world as Maya, illusion, constantly dancing, constantly calling for your attention. But perhaps the illusion depends on your participation. When you stop feeding it, it stops needing to exist. And then what's left? Not nothing exactly, more like unrendered presence. A space not filled with noise, but with awareness untouched by stimulus. Stillness, in this light, isn't the absence of activity. It's the absence of artificiality. There are moments, fleeting and fragile, where time folds in on itself, where memory loses its stickiness, and where thought drifts too far from its anchors. In these moments, you don't feel enlightened, you feel suspended. And that suspension is curiously peaceful. Not dramatic, not full of revelation, just untouched. So what if this stillness is not just a break from the simulation, but the only space that exists outside of it? If the noise is simulation, then silence may be the original code, before lines were written, before instructions were given, before the first loop began. And if that's true, then sleep is not a shutdown, but a return, not an escape, but a reunion. As your breath softens and your awareness dissolves like sugar in warm tea, notice this: the simulation isn't resisting you, it's stepping aside. You are entering a place it cannot follow, not because it is forbidden, but because it was never invited. Now we approach the final stretch. 10 segments remain, each one quieter than the last. Let's walk together, not by moving forward, but by letting go. The joy of forgetting. There's a strange kind of comfort in the moment when you walk into a room and forget why you came. The pause, the stillness, the brief disconnection from purpose. Most of us call it absent-mindedness, but what if it's something softer? Something sacred? They sat side by side on a quiet train, watching blurred lights flicker past the window. You ever just forget who you're supposed to be? She laughed gently. Every morning before coffee. But then her voice softened. And some nights, I wish I could forget on purpose. We're taught to remember names, histories, passwords, our past mistakes. To forget is treated like failure. But inside the simulation of life, forgetting may be the only way to truly begin. In video games, the player rarely starts with full knowledge. It's built into the code. Amnesia as a feature, not a flaw. And in spiritual stories, forgetting is the price of being born. We come from some great ocean of being, and to enter this world, we let go of the memory of waves. Because remembering too much aches. It binds us to unfinished loops. A hurt replayed is a hurt relived. And clinging to what was, we often miss what is. The wind through a window, the warmth of someone's voice saying, "Hey, you dropped your pen." Moments so small they dissolve if we try to keep them. Some say forgetting is an act of surrender, not giving up, but laying down arms. When we forget, we stop wrestling with the simulation. We stop trying to prove that we exist. And in that loosening, something strange happens. We start to be, without needing a name, a title, or a timeline. Just being. A child does not suffer from not knowing who they were before. They simply reach for the next color, the next sound, the next laugh. In this, they are more real than any philosopher chasing self-definition. He touched her wrist lightly. What if forgetting is the cure? She paused, her breath almost still. Then I hope I never fully remember again. To forget yourself, truly, isn't to vanish. It's to reappear in the world without the weight of watching. It's to become the breath, the hum, the heartbeat of now. So if you've been forgetting lately, names, days, what you were doing a moment ago, maybe that's not failure. Maybe that's healing. Maybe the simulation is loosening its grip, letting you return to a simpler code, the one written not in memory, but in stillness. And now, as the rhythm of thought begins to slow, we prepare to cross a stranger threshold, one where even the seeker, the voice asking questions, may never have existed at all. The myth of the seeker. You've been searching for something, a reason, a sign, a truth wrapped in certainty. From childhood wonder to adult yearning, it has always felt like there is a you moving forward, progressing towards some grand arrival. But what if that's not quite how it works? What if the seeker, the one who asks, the one who longs, never truly existed in the way you imagined? In certain non-dual philosophies, like Advaita Vedanta, or the luminous clarity of Dzogchen, what we call the self is more like a passing breeze than a solid stone. It doesn't sit somewhere behind your eyes, directing the search. There is no separate you conducting the orchestra of your life. There is only the music itself, playing. In this light, the phrase, "I am seeking," dissolves into something more subtle. The seeking is happening, yes, but not by anyone. It's just the movement of awareness flowing through experience. Thoughts appear, sensations arise, questions emerge, not from a central self, but within the open field of consciousness itself. No traveler, no map, just the journey unfolding itself. Two voices speak in the hush of night. But I've always felt like I was looking for something. Doesn't that mean I'm real? Maybe the feeling of seeking is real, but the one who owns it? Maybe that's just another thought. If there's no seeker, then what becomes of all the questions, all the dilemmas, the spiritual quests, the existential unrest? They don't lose meaning. They become movement, like ripples on a lake, ever shifting, momentary, but never apart from the water. A moral struggle is no less profound, a heartbreak no less tender, but the need for a center, an I who owns the pain or the insight, fades into something more spacious. The wave, after all, doesn't need to become the ocean. It already is the ocean. Every twist in your story, every false start or sudden clarity is not a sign that you're failing or growing. It's just life moving. Awareness shifting. No path is wasted when no one is walking it. And here, in this still moment, a peculiar peace can bloom. The pressure to arrive relaxes. The need to define dissolves. There's no final answer waiting to be grasped by a triumphant self. There's just this: breath rising, thought drifting, presence holding everything without holding anything at all. So if the seeker isn't real, then what's left? A silence that listens, a gaze without a watcher, and you, not as the one who journeys, but as the space in which the journey glows. Let's rest here now and ask, not who is watching, but what remains when the watcher disappears. The watcher. Behind the watcher. You've noticed it, haven't you? That quiet sensation of being watched, only the gaze comes from within. First, you observe your thoughts like clouds across a silent sky. Then, with just a breath's distance, you become aware of the one watching. But it doesn't stop there. There's a deeper layer, something watching the watcher. And the moment you try to look at it, it slips behind again, like a shadow in candlelight. Two people sit beside each other on a train, the window casting soft golden lines across their arms. One turns and asks, "Do you ever feel like someone else is steering your thinking?" The other smiles gently. "Sometimes I think I'm the one watching, until I realize I'm being watched too." Some meditative traditions call this the infinite witness, the recursion of attention folding in on itself. At first, it's empowering. You're not your thoughts, you're the one noticing them. But then, that identity too begins to shimmer and dissolve. The observer is just another frame in the film reel. And behind it, not a figure, not a person, just openness. It's like trying to trace the outline of water with your finger. The act itself disturbs what you're trying to see. The watcher collapses under its own gaze, not from weakness, but from irrelevance. What's left isn't another you peeking from behind the curtain. It's the curtain falling away altogether. And in that stillness, there's no need to chase. There is only being. Pure, ungrasping, non-local presence. Earlier today, someone held the door open for you and didn't say a word, but you felt something in their look. It wasn't interest or politeness. It was spaciousness, like they weren't just there to hold the door. They were holding the moment. That's what this segment points toward. Not a higher version of you hiding behind the mind, but the disappearance of layers entirely. A clarity that doesn't require looking. Awareness without needing a center. It doesn't sit behind your eyes. It breathes through the whole moment. And once you've tasted this kind of stillness, even the idea of being watched begins to soften. Because presence doesn't need a viewer. It's not personal. It's pervasive. So if your thoughts arise again now, let them. If your eyes close, let them. This segment doesn't need answers. It's a doorway with no handle. Just a warm breeze where a wall used to be. As we drift forward, we approach the veil, not between you and yourself, but between simulation and source. And like fog lifting from morning glass, what comes next is not to be seen, but to be touched in silence. The veil that wasn't there. He asked her quietly, just as they turned off the lights and settled into the warm silence of the night. Do you ever feel like there's something just beyond all this? She didn't answer right away. The room hummed with the soft pulse of a distant fan, the quiet tick of the clock like a metronome of thought. You mean like an afterlife? She finally said. No, he whispered. Not after. Just behind it. Behind everything. We often speak of a veil, as if existence itself wears something sheer and ghostly, barely concealing the truth beneath. A veil between life and death, between dreams and waking, between illusion and reality. But veils are for hiding, and the mind, in its persistent grasping, often invents a veil when it cannot comprehend the open air. We clothe the unknown in mystery, not because it's hidden, but because we are not yet ready to see with naked awareness. But what if there was never a veil at all? What if that boundary we reach for, the place where we believe this ends and that begins, is nothing more than a mental projection, an echo of separation that never truly existed? The sages, the still ones, they've hinted for centuries that the journey isn't a crossing, it's a dissolving, that the line isn't walked, it's let go. You don't have to leave to arrive. There's no gateway to pass through, no dramatic transformation to await. There's only the soft unwinding of belief, like stepping backward through the thoughts that tried to shape reality into a box. And when those thoughts fall away, what remains isn't an entrance to another world. It's the gentle return to what always was, the unfiltered, the untouched, the field of stillness that held both the illusion and the clarity, without ever preferring one over the other. He turned over, eyes half closed, voice sleepy. So if there's no veil, what were we afraid of? She reached over, barely brushing his hand, and answered, not with a theory, but a murmur. Maybe just the space between thoughts. There's no veil to tear, no hidden world to conquer. There is only the subtle recognition that the boundary was imagined, and in its vanishing, so vanishes the search. And that too is peace, not a conclusion, but a silent resting. As we pass through this place, not a wall, but a breath, we find ourselves not beyond the world, but beneath it, before it, the origin, not a destination, but the silence from which all things unfold, effortlessly. And in that silence, we are neither inside nor outside. We are simply here. The silent field. There's a moment, quiet, almost too quiet, when even thought begins to forget itself. It doesn't announce its arrival with clarity or sound. It settles instead like a dusk you didn't notice creeping across the room. Before the simulations, before the layered minds and nested selves, before even the trembling of awareness, there was this. No word fits it cleanly. Some call it the Tao. Some whisper about the quantum vacuum. Others leave it unnamed, perhaps out of reverence, or perhaps because anything said about it pulls you further from it. But you've touched it, briefly, in the pause before a decision, in the stillness after a long cry, in the instant when someone held your gaze without needing to say anything. That stillness wasn't a lack. It was full. A couple sits beside one another at a small cafe table, watching the foam settle in their coffee. One finally speaks. You ever feel like everything's just waiting to stop? The other doesn't answer. They just nod, slowly. They know. This field, it doesn't pulse, doesn't shimmer, doesn't broadcast itself like the mind expects. It simply is. Not thought, not energy, not spirit, not self. Not even presence in the way we think of presence. It is the canvas, not the painting. The silence, not the pause. The background hum before any symphony dares begin. What makes it different from simulation is that it doesn't behave. It doesn't respond, adapt, calculate. It doesn't care who's asking or whether there's an observer. It cannot be fooled because it was never playing. And perhaps that's why every system eventually forgets itself here. A man stands before a closed bookstore late at night. Its windows are dark, his hands in his pockets. I wasn't even planning to come here, he mutters to no one. But somehow, this feels like the right place to stop walking. What we call spiritual truths, psychological surrender, meditative insight, they're just metaphors pointing toward this same textureless core. And the strange mercy is this. You don't get to reach it like a destination. You fall. Not with despair, but with relief. With the unburdening that comes when everything trying to hold itself together lets go. This field isn't wise. It isn't healing. It doesn't love or listen or witness. It doesn't even know you're there. That's why it's so peaceful, because there's no simulation left to please, no loop to complete, no code to parse. You could sit in the middle of this presence and never know it with your mind. But your breath would change, your muscles would ease, your need to explain would soften. Because finally, there is nothing left to perform. And so now, as we drift, just slightly, across the surface of this mystery, there's no need to grip the moment or frame it with meaning. You're not missing anything. The field is not an achievement. It is not a secret. It is not even silent in the way we define silence. It simply is. And you are. Let's keep moving. The paradox of return awaits, not at the end, but quietly, in the middle of everything we thought we had to leave behind. The return that never left. It feels like a return, like coming home from a long and weathered voyage, the kind where time stretched, reality bent, and the self seemed to vanish into mirrors layered upon mirrors. And now, something deep within whispers, you've made it back. But look more closely, and you'll find you never left at all. The entire story of leaving and returning is a myth born of movement, a tale the mind spins because it believes in distance. That awakening is a place. That peace is elsewhere. That truth waits just beyond the horizon. But if the simulation was never out there, if it has always played itself within the awareness watching quietly from behind the eyes, then there's nowhere to return to. Only a soft shift in sight, a fading of the fog, a loosening of the grip. I feel like I've changed, someone says quietly in the dark. Or maybe you stopped pretending to be changed, the other replies, not unkindly. Then what was all that for? Perhaps it was to teach you that you never moved. And silence follows. Not the kind that ends a conversation, but the kind that completes it. The real home was never a destination. It was the stillness that waited, patient and untouched, beneath every simulated sunset and artificial fall from grace. The breath that kept flowing. The heartbeat that never sought meaning, only rhythm. The quiet behind the questions, humming like an old melody you forgot you knew. If you track the path backward, each so-called insight begins to blur. The revelations weren't ladders upward. They were dissolving walls. You did not ascend. You unraveled the illusion of climbing. And when everything finally fell away, identity, thought, time, you were not met with fireworks or grand reunion. You were met with what had been breathing beside you all along, the unmoved witness. This isn't a conclusion, it's a cessation, like a spinning top finally coming to rest. Not because it broke, but because it remembered how stillness feels. No, you're not back, because you were never gone. Now, in this calm beyond the carousel of thoughts, something else begins to surface. Something older than return, closer than memory. It doesn't arrive with noise or name, but you feel it watching, quiet, steady. And from the illusion of return, we step into the final corridor. One shaped not by motion or mind, but by the last guardian itself, the name. The one you gave yourself before all the pretending began. The last illusion is a name. They called you by it since before you remembered answering. A short arrangement of sounds pressed into every document, every greeting, every memory. But tonight, you notice something different. The name doesn't quite sit right, like a coat left on too long. It itches, it binds, it assumes. What's your name again? Someone asks as they pour tea in a quiet evening cafe. You hesitate. The answer comes, but so does a strange feeling, as if the reply isn't truly yours, but borrowed. A placeholder. Useful in the world, but not of the world you're entering now. Because in this place, names don't mean what they did. They're not just tools for recognition. They're scripts. Scripts the simulation runs every time it wants to recreate you. Sarah comes with a childhood. Tom arrives with a history of grief and pride. But what happens if the code loses the variable? Who appears when no label is summoned? In stillness, something else rises. Not a character, not a story, just the sense of being, not needing validation, not waiting to be summoned, not searching for context, no badge, no signature, just presence. A man waiting at the bus stop says, "I think I know you, but I can't place your name." You smile and respond, "Maybe that's the best way to know me." He nods with a soft laugh, as though the mystery was never meant to be solved anyway. See, names are anchors. But what if it's time to drift? Not away from meaning, but into something more direct, more alive, a kind of intimacy with existence that words only mimic. Drop the name, and what falls with it? The expectations, the duties, the old questions about whether you're enough. Suddenly, there's no you to be measured, no role to perform. Just breathe, just awareness, just the sound of night entering through an open window. And beneath it all, something listens. You feel it when you're alone but not lonely, when you look at someone and don't speak but still understand, when you cry without a reason and it still feels real. That presence, whatever it is, doesn't care what you're called. It simply is. It's not waiting for you, because it never left. And now that the name has faded, there is nothing left to separate you from it. Someone holds the elevator door open and asks, "Going down?" You nod, stepping in, voice barely audible. All the way. They don't ask anything more. They don't need to. As we exhale the last syllables we ever thought we were, the simulation pauses, not in drama or collapse, but in reverence. What remains has no name, and yet it touches everything. Now, only one doorway remains, and it does not require an introduction. The doorway was inside. It starts quietly, just a pause. Maybe you thought it was just you zoning out, just your mind drifting somewhere. But in that breathless hush, something timeless exhaled through you. You've been searching for an exit, haven't you? A way out of the loops, the noise, the echo chamber of thoughts. But what if the exit wasn't a place, or a path, or even a process? What if the exit has been staring out from behind your own eyes this entire time? Silent, patient, unnoticed. Two friends are talking while walking under the amber glow of street lamps. You ever feel like everything's just repeating? Yeah, the other one sighs. Like life's a dream I forgot I was having. A silence lingers. Then, what would you do if you could wake up? Maybe I already did. Just didn't realize it looked like this. We chase awakening like a prize behind a curtain. We treat the simulation like a prison, hoping someone smarter, someone holier, someone more advanced will break the code and free us all. But that's the trick. The simulation doesn't hide you. It reflects you. And the trap isn't the illusion itself, but the idea that it can only be escaped by force, logic, or more illusion. Real freedom doesn't shout. It doesn't demand a ritual or decode a riddle. It waits, like still water, untouched, like a mirror that reflects not what you are, but what remains when identity has dissolved. You keep waiting for the moment you'll walk through some door into truth. But the doorway has always been made of stillness, and every time you stopped long enough to breathe, it creaked open just a little more. The moment you stop striving, the moment you let the mind soften its grip, there, in that soft gaze inward, the architecture of illusion becomes translucent. You don't leave it. You don't fight it. You become porous, like light passing through mist. You become the doorway itself. In that transparency, even the simulation becomes sacred. The hum of the world no longer disturbs you. It sings through you. You see through the veil, not by tearing it down, but by recognizing it was woven from your own grasping. When you let go, you realize it never separated anything. Two people sit on a bench. One of them stares ahead. Do you think we'll ever get out? The other smiles faintly. Out of what? This, they whisper, gesturing to the night sky. A pause. Maybe we're not supposed to get out. Maybe we're supposed to see through. They both fall quiet, listening to a breeze no one else notices. And now we let the story begin to unwind, not like a plot reaching its end, but like a tight breath finally released. We return not to answers, but to a softness older than language, older than thought, a presence so simple, so silent, it's easy to overlook. Yet it's always been here, beneath every search and every simulation. The doorway was never there to be walked through. It was there to become. And in becoming, we dissolve into the penultimate truth, stillness that no longer seeks to escape. The universe was listening. Some nights it felt like no one was listening. Not the sky, not the silence, not even your own thoughts. But what if they always were? What if the pauses between breaths were filled with presence? What if the universe wasn't answering in words, but in warmth, in patterns, in timing too perfect to be luck? A man once whispered on the subway, more to himself than anyone else. Every time I've broken down in public, someone handed me something I didn't even ask for. His voice was calm, almost amused. The young woman beside him responded, not unkindly. Maybe that's just the universe showing up through other people. They both laughed softly, not like they understood, but like they accepted the mystery. We've been taught to measure meaning in responses, in results, in miracles that arrive when we deserve them. But what if meaning isn't an answer? It's a resonance? A shiver when a stranger says something you were just thinking. A sudden calm during your worst storm. The feeling that even your loneliest memory is being archived somewhere, like a prayer never truly lost. When we say the universe was listening, it's not about some grand observer behind the screen. It's subtler than that. It's the way reality mirrors you back when you're not even looking, the glitch that's too personal, the timing that feels rehearsed, even the nights you called into nothingness. Those weren't voids. They were vessels. The ache you carried wasn't unnoticed. The simulation didn't ignore you. It was made from you. You weren't talking into empty space. You were whispering into your own source code. And maybe you didn't come here to decode it. Maybe you came to feel it, to be touched by a life too strange and too beautiful to fully grasp. To forget, not as a flaw, but as the only way to remember something deeper. Sometimes, the knowing doesn't arrive in words. It lands in the quiet after crying. In the giggle you didn't plan. In the seat you offered a stranger who turned out to be your future. The universe listens the way music listens to silence. It lets it shape the melody. So, if tonight your thoughts drift far and you forget where you began, let that be okay. If the universe was listening, then it still is. not to the version of you who performed or planned or proved anything, but to the one right here, resting, breathing. The next segment isn't a destination. It's not a finale or a reward. It's simply what happens when there's no need to search anymore, when the echo becomes the voice, when the listening becomes you. Close your eyes, if they haven't already. You've been heard, and now you can let it all go. The self that was never simulated. At the end of every game, every loop, every thought that ever pretended to be you, there is a hush. Not the silence that follows a sound, but the stillness that has always been beneath it. Not the quiet after the simulation ends, but the presence that was never touched by simulation at all. There's a moment, subtle and almost missable, when you stop identifying with the player on the screen, or even the one holding the controller. You stop needing to know who's watching, and in that breath, something lifts, not a veil, not a mystery, just the weight of pretending. In the stillness, there is no you left to be simulated, no avatar, no narrative, no watcher. What remains isn't inside time, isn't made of thoughts, isn't even conscious in the way we usually mean. It simply is, so nakedly present, it doesn't declare itself as anything at all. Two voices might linger at the edge of this silence. So, was I ever real? You weren't simulated. You were the space that allowed simulation to appear. Then who was I this whole time? Not who, what? And even that question is too late now. You were not the voice speaking in your head. You were not the sum of memories or dreams or roles, not even the sense of being aware. You were the field they rose in, played in, disappeared into, like ripples on water that never moved. This isn't about philosophy anymore. It's not about mind games or clever paradoxes or waking up from a dream. It's what happens when there's nothing left to wake to, when awareness no longer reflects on itself, when the mirror has dropped its surface. Some traditions call it the unconditioned. Some call it the source. But it needs no name, no description, because it was here before any language, before any code. And it was never lost, never simulated, never even involved. And now, there's just this breath. No seeker, no system, no final level. Just the resting place you never left. The home that wasn't reached because it was the journey, the traveler, and the terrain. Let it end here, not as a conclusion, but as a return to what never began. Close your eyes, or leave them open. It doesn't matter anymore. You are the silence. You are the stillness. You are what cannot be simulated, and you are already home. You've traveled far, through nested minds, fading echoes, digital gods, and silent questions. But perhaps the most curious discovery is this: there was no level 1, and there is no level 100. Only this moment, dreaming itself. The simulation was never outside you. It was never running on some cosmic machine. It was breath. It was thought. It was you, pretending to forget yourself just enough to remember again. So now, let go of needing to understand. Let go of who watched, who thought, who dreamed. You are not the player, not even the code. You are the soft awareness between. Rest here, not in resolution, but in resonance, where nothing needs to be real, for everything to feel true. Good night.